Okay, we're going to get started with the Commonwealth's presentation. Fred D'Angelo took ill, and we have Dave Hackett sitting on the panel. He'll be with us today. So Brian, we're going to proceed with the Commonwealth's presentation.
Thank you. Members of the panel, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Good afternoon. Today we change gears. Let me start by saying that I think that the union did an admirable job. Certainly it's union representatives speaking on behalf of the men and women who serve the Department of Corrections day in and day out. It is a difficult job, and we all recognize that. I don't think that there's a person here that doesn't value the services that they provide and the commitment that they make, not just to the Commonwealth, but to the people and to their families. Each day, as it was represented, they walk in and serve behind bars with inmates. It is a difficult job. It creates a difficult environment, and it has special needs. But unfortunately, when the union made its presentation, they made a presentation as if their unit exists in a vacuum, as if the special needs and the wants of this particular bargaining unit are so unique and so different that they must be analyzed on their own as an independent, freestanding universe that pays no respect or no attention to the wants and needs of other agencies. The executive branch employs tens of thousands of people in multiple agencies, all of which serve special purposes, all of which serve a public purpose. To that end, no $1 for one group is more important than the next. The Department of Corrections needs money. Their money is important. The Department of Transportation needs money. Their needs are equally as important. They are two different public purposes that are equally important in our lives. The same holds true for virtually every other executive branch office. We cannot analyze the terms of this collective bargaining agreement at the exception or the exclusion of everyone else working in the executive branch. President Pinto testified that this is the first time in his career as an officer with the union that safety was the #1 issue in their survey. #1. Yet, there was not a single proposal made to address any safety concern. The union presented Katerina Spinaris to address employee wellness. Her conclusion was that this group is overwhelmingly unwell, more unwell than any other person in the country. Yet, there was not a single proposal to address employee well-being. It's so bad that the union contests that they can't retain veteran employees. Yet, there was not a single analysis showing that turnover is a problem. There is not a single analysis showing that the ability to attract candidates is a problem. In fact, in the most recent fiscal year for which data is available, only 1.5% of the correction officer workforce left voluntarily before they became pension eligible. It is true that some individuals left when they became pension eligible. There is nothing we can do to stop an individual from making a choice about whether or not they want to retire. We can incent them to stay, but we can't force them to stay. Yet, the union made a proposal that would entitle them to health benefits in 15 years instead of 20 years. They want to incent people to stay, but they also want to make it more responsible to leave earlier. That doesn't solve what they claim is a turnover problem. It hurts it. The union then presented that it is cutting the fat. It is presenting principally two issues: wages and benefits. But they didn't provide any analysis that showed how their wage proposal addressed their safety concerns, or how their wage proposal addressed their wellness concerns. What they would suggest, or what they imply, is that if you give us more money, people would stay. But again, there is no turnover problem. The union presented Dr. Jim Markham, who analyzed purchasing power, but he analyzed purchasing power in a vacuum. In fact, I think as arbitrator D'Angelo showed, his analysis was fundamentally flawed in that Dr. Markham took a 2003 or a 2010 wage rate and then compared it to what it would be, or the purchasing power according to cost of inflation in 2014. But what Dr. Markham didn't do is account for the fact that employees actually worked, and they actually moved, and they actually got raises in those years. So for example, in year 10 of employment, Dr. Markham's analysis says they have a base salary of $53,892. And that once you adjust for inflation, the cost would be $58,215. But in the contract, that wage rate only went to $56,604. So his logical conclusion from that analysis is, well, that individual lost $1,500 or $1,600 worth of purchasing power because of the cost of inflation stripped that wage rate in the contract. But what Dr. Markham didn't account for is that 10-year employee is no longer a 10-year employee. In 2014, they are a 14-year employee making $61,319. Purchasing power has not eroded. Dr. Markham's analysis shows that it has not eroded. It maybe isn't as high as they'd like it to be, but that does not suggest that their purchasing power has eroded. Dr. Markham also analyzed purchasing power in a total vacuum. He analyzed it only with respect to this bargaining unit and said there is no basis to compare them to anyone else except correction officers in other states. Well, that simply isn't true. Corrections officers shop at the same stores, they go to the same grocery market, they pay the same gas prices as everybody else in the communities where they live. Purchasing power and cost of living is a function of the community that you are a member of. It is relevant to determine what do the corrections officers make in relation to those with whom they live and work day in and day out, whether they work for the Commonwealth, whether they work for a private employer, or whether they're unemployed. Cost of living and purchasing of power is a function of reality. It is a function of my ability and your ability to walk into a grocery store and buy a dozen eggs. It is a function of my ability and your ability to drive up to a gas pump and buy a gallon of gas. Our prices are no different than the prices that anybody else in the Commonwealth pays. What you pay, they pay. Cost of living and purchasing power is a function of our total community. That includes everyone, not just us. It's everyone.
Did Fred ask you to take a pay decrease? I'm just wondering, because you shop in the same community.
We do shop in the same community. He's never asked me to take a pay decrease. The union also made a proposal that it wants to leave the PEBTF. Yet, the union presented no evidence that leaving the PEBTF would address their safety concerns or their wellness concerns. With respect to the wellness concerns, in fact, they didn't make a single proposal to increase the level of benefit at all in a substantive way that would address the wellness issues, the psychiatric concerns that were discussed during testimony. Sure, they want more money for eyeglasses. They'd like an HRA for $300, but that doesn't address the psychological issues that they testified about. The PEBTF proposal is exactly what they described to this panel. It is born out of distrust. And let's make no mistake, it is a real and genuine distrust. I believe it. I know it. They do not trust the PEBTF to protect and provide their benefits. But that is not a reason to withdraw them. They suggest that their benefits under a separate trust will remain unchanged and they will be the beneficiaries of PEBTF's bargaining power, whether they participate or not. That isn't true. They cannot guarantee, nor can they even rely on the notion that the PEBTF's contracts will flow through to their own negotiations with healthcare providers. They cannot believe that the purchasing power of 280,000 individuals will benefit a group of 28,000 individuals who are separate and distinct. But more than that, they don't get anything by creating a separate trust, but their own peace of mind that some other union isn't going to screw them. Because it was explained to you, and you'll hear more testimony, that the trust operates on a simple majority vote. That means the Commonwealth trustees plus one. That means whether they participate in the PEBTF or whether they participate in a trust of their own, it is the Commonwealth trustees plus one. They have the exact same ability to influence level of benefits today as they would in a separate trust. There was testimony that one of the reasons we should distrust the PEBTF so vigorously is that there was a deferral, and that since the deferral or at any time that the trust has existed, the trustees have never addressed whether or not there should be a suspension in employee contributions because the trust has met a 3-month reserve for a 6-month period of time. Any trustee can bring that to the panel. Any trustee can ask that that be evaluated. It has never been requested of the PEBTF. And let's be honest, the Commonwealth trustees, in a desire to maintain the solvency of the trust and to honor its commitment of a 3-month reserve, is not going to contemplate any financial arrangement or suspension that will jeopardize that opportunity. It will not do it with the PEBTF, and it would not do it if you had your own trust. But we also need to look at the history. This group has never been punished by the PEBTF. The distrust is real. They do not appreciate or even respect the other unions that participate in the fund. And they do believe that the other unions will somehow hurt them. But what they automatically discount when they come to the table with that perspective is that the Commonwealth employees, the managers who get the exact same level of benefits, that rely on the exact same fund to administer and make sure that their family is well, would be complicit with another union just to spite this group. It isn't true. It simply is not true that the Commonwealth trustees would diminish a benefit for every employee in the Commonwealth just to hurt this group. It is not true. There is no proof. It will not happen. If the trust ever needs to change the level of benefit, whether to make it better or to somehow make a plan design change in order to save money, which is what the union's expert testified would need to happen in order for their own trust to compete on the same level. Plan design changes. It occurs for everyone. Management, AFSCME, Pscoa, PSSU, every single participant in the trust. I don't want to diminish that the trust is real, or the distrust is real. I don't want to diminish the fact that this group believes that there are other unions that wants to hurt them. And I will not pretend that I can referee that distrust, or I can bridge the gap between those unions, because I don't know that it can be done. But what I can promise this group is that no decision by a Commonwealth trustee will ever be made to hurt a particular union. That is not how they operate. That is not how they make decisions. The PEBTF provides a good benefit. It has never been diminished. It has been increased. It will increase again, according to the Affordable Care Act. The benefits are good. They're so good that the group made a proposal just to get out, but to maintain the exact same level. Change nothing else. The The Commonwealth has the next 3 days to justify its bargaining proposals. And during the course of that discussion, I want everyone to understand and recognize that the proposals are made in the totality of the wants and needs of the executive branch. They are made with the assumption that this group is part of a larger world. This group does not believe it should be subject to pattern bargaining, but it is. And there are ways that this panel can determine whether or not there is a unique and compelling circumstance that would justify a deviation from that pattern. Based upon the union's presentation to date, there are no unique and compelling circumstances that justify their wage demand. There are no unique and compelling circumstances that justify the removal from the PEBTF to create their own health care fund. The Commonwealth's proposals must be evaluated in a light that recognizes the entire executive branch. The panel must look at the Commonwealth's bargaining proposals that reflects and understands that the Commonwealth citizens don't just need corrections officers. They also need people to fix the roads. They also need people to answer the phones when you need a social services worker. They also need people to administer funds that provide heat to the poor in times of need and in the winter. The Commonwealth has a range of jobs and requirements, and it must meet all of those obligations. And it is in that light that the Commonwealth makes its proposal to the corrections officers. It is in that light that the Commonwealth makes its proposals to AFSCME. It is in that light that the Commonwealth makes its proposals to the PSUSU social services workers. Every single proposal is made mindful of the fact that you are one part of a total government that has many missions and many obligations, and part of a government that does not have the financial resources to just give everything to everyone. We are bound by fiscal responsibility. Whether you agree with this administration or disagree with this administration politically is of no matter, because the reality of the dollars that come into the state is what controls the Commonwealth's ability to fund every mission, every obligation, be it healthcare, be it pension, be it roads, be it prisons. We have a pot of money that is real. We have a limited pot of money that we must stretch to its maximum distance. Every dollar today needs to work like 10. And we need to be accepting of that. We cannot create money. We must create contracts and agree to contracts with our bargaining partners that are responsible not only to the employees in the executive branch, but also to the people that they serve, the citizens of the Commonwealth. And that is our goal. Today, first, you will hear from Deputy Secretary Ringler, who will talk to you about the world of the Department of Corrections. And you'll see, by and large, it's not different than what they presented to you today. You'll see that it is a difficult job. You'll see that it is a big commitment by every man and every woman that walks through those gates. But you'll also see that the Department of Corrections is proud of its employees, that it's not an adversary, it's an advocate. You'll also see that if money wasn't an objective, they would do more. And you'll also see that the Department of Corrections is continually trying to get better because it understands that safety is paramount. As Auditor General D. Pasquale testified, it's paramount not just to the employee, but it's paramount to the inmate. You will see that Deputy Secretary Ringler and the Secretary's staff are constantly self-evaluating and constantly trying to get better. It is true that the Auditor General did determine that there were deficiencies in the training program, but it is also true that Auditor General D. Pasquale is happy with the fact that the department accepted his findings and are working to make those corrections. The department did not object. The department did not say, we don't care. The department said, we agree, we're going to get better. That's our objective, to constantly get better with the resources that are available to the men and women of the Department of Corrections and the Department of Public Welfare. It is important. And I think that you will see, if you look at this presentation objectively, that there is no reason to distrust the men and women who work every day with you, not against you. And with that, I will introduce Deputy Secretary Ringler.
Thank you. Everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, well, my name is Tim Ringler. I'm the Deputy Secretary for Administration of the Department of Corrections, and I'm here to, provide an introduction, history, and state of the Department of Corrections. Before I get started with that, I'd like to tell you a little bit about myself and how I got to be here today. And I'll do it chronologically because that seems to be easier to follow going that way than going in the reverse fashion. When I got out of high school, I joined the U.S. Air Force and served in the Air Force, and upon leaving, I went to Penn State, and I got a bachelor's of administration in political science, and furthered that up with a master's in public administration, also from Penn State. In July 1981, I was selected to be in the first class of the Commonwealth Management Intern program, which is for recent master's level graduates. And that program lasted for about a year, although in that first year you spent the last 3 months in the agency you're going to work for. So in 1982, I came to the Department of Corrections and have been here ever since. When I came in 1982, I came as a budget analyst, and I've pretty much, have been working with the finances ever since also. In 1984, I became chief of the Fiscal Management Division, and I held that job, although the title changed a couple times. And by the way, when I did come in back in 1982, we weren't the Department of Corrections. We weren't even a department back at that time. It was called the Bureau of Correction. It wasn't even a department level at that time yet. In 2003, I became director of the Bureau of Administration, which also dealt with the finances, but did other administrative things and things like telephones, automotive, and other types of things as well. In 2010, former Secretary Beard had made me acting Deputy Secretary of Administration for the Department of Corrections, and that was followed up in 2011 by the new Secretary, John Wetzel, appointing me through the governor to be Deputy Secretary. In the role that I have now, I oversee fiscal activities, human resources, EEO issues, our correctional industries program, healthcare operations, our food service operation, construction, maintenance, safety issues, as well as just general administration, things of working in, with the team of administrators we have in the department. So enough about myself. Let's move on to the presentation here. There's 43 slides here, so hopefully I can move through some of these fairly quickly so we won't be here all afternoon. The first slide depicts the cover of what we call our history book, which is actually called 2 Centuries of Corrections in Pennsylvania, a commemorative history, and that was funded by a grant from the Pennsylvania Museum Commission back more than 10 years ago. In that book, it tells you about Pennsylvania's history and the rich history that we do have, emanating from the establishment of the Walnut Street Jail in 1773 to the Eastern Penitentiary in 1829. This is pretty much the forerunner of modern corrections in the U.S. As we move on through the next slide, which I'll show, just 2 other key dates that I want to mention. One is basically 1980. 1980 was considered to be the beginning of the significant increase in corrections around the United States. We basically had 10,000 inmates at that time. We're over 50,000 inmates right now. That was the beginning, 1980, of that growth. And it continued throughout our time period. And the next one is 1984, which is when corrections did become a department through the Department of Corrections Act of 1984. The Pennsylvania system, as was shown in the history book, also mentioned in the proclamation here from Governor Corbett for last year's Corrections Employee Week, and there'll be a new proclamation coming out shortly because next week is Corrections Employee Week also. And we talk about the influence of developing modern penology through the department. There's one quote that I want to mention from that book, and that is that no state has been more influential in the evolution of corrections than Pennsylvania, which can take pride in its rich history and distinguished record. The state's reputation for penal reform was confirmed by an independent panel of prison security experts who rated Pennsylvania as among the best run correctional systems in the nation. Fast forward to 2014. This is an overview of the department as it is today. We have 25 facilities, one boot camp, a training academy. Each of the institutions is headed by a superintendent of that facility who reports to a regional deputy secretary in central office. Our budget is $1.9 billion. Just another history piece here. When I started, we had less than $100 million in our budget. So obviously it has grown, but our population, as I mentioned, has grown fivefold as well. We also have 15 community correction centers, and we contract with 44 additional centers. We now have over 15,000 employees in the department to deal with the 51,000 inmates in the system. This is our mission statement. If you would bear with me, I do want to read it. It's something that we changed our mission statements under Secretary Wetzel, so a lot of time and effort was put into, making this change. The Pennsylvania Department of Corrections operates as one team, embraces diversity, and commits to enhancing public safety. We are proud of our reputation as leaders in the corrections field. Our mission is to reduce criminal behavior by providing individualized treatment and education to offenders, resulting in successful community reintegration through accountability and positive changes. This was revised in 2011. This slide shows a map of the facilities across the state. The union presentation had shown you one as well. It's not really much different from that. I just wanted to point out SCI Phoenix. It will be replacing Graterford. It's being built now. The completion date is expected in late 2015, and we would be transitioning move-in operations from Graterford, closing that institution down, and moving to Phoenix. There's no other planned facility increases in the horizon. As you can see, the institutions are scattered across the state. Part of that reason is that over the years, as we've grown from the 9 institutions when I started to the 25 that we have today, a number of communities had come in and asked for prisons to be in their communities. And other locations did not want institutions around that area. So we heard testimony about being in rural areas. The urban areas pretty much did not want us. When we closed Pittsburgh and thought about closing Pittsburgh, more than 10 years ago, we had put in a request to build a prison in Allegheny County, and we couldn't find one tract of land in Allegheny County that would allow a prison to be built there. It wound up as SCI Fayette, and that's how far we had to go till we found a site that would be willing to accommodate us. So I'll move on to the next slide. We talk about prototypical facilities, and you saw a slide of a prototypical facility, which was Cole Township. This is Fayette. Doesn't look that much different from the air in terms of its layout. The film that was showed, did show a riot in Camp Hill in 1989. And I was here through that period of time, and it was a traumatic experience for the department, especially for the individuals that were directly involved in that. In the aftermath of that, and along with the boom in corrections, the additional inmates coming through the system, we went on a massive building campaign. And in 1991, legislation was approved to build a number of these prototypical facilities: Albion, Houtzdale, Somerset, Mahanoy, Cole Township. And so what prototypical means is, as we were building a bunch of new prisons, we decided to get an expert to come in, help us design a prison. We were just coming out of the riot at Camp Hill, which had shown to be there were areas of that prison that were not safe, should not have been operating with the knowledge that we knew in the afterwards, so that we weren't going to make that same mistake again. So we developed a design and have been using that design mostly since that time, tinkering as we go along the way, as we learn new processes. And what we do in these, we're looking to be efficient in manpower, cost, but also for safety reasons, and to segregate sections of the institution, things that, once again, were not available in Camp Hill. So we did make a number of those changes. Now, there's a lot of facilities that aren't on this list. And a couple that are newer, such as Pine Grove and Chester, but are specialty institutions and are not near the size of these facilities. And Pine Grove handles young adult offenders, and Chester's a drug and alcohol program. Some of our older facilities are also specialized programs, and they are Laurel Highlands, which is a long-term medical facility, Camp Hill, which is our diagnostic and classification center, Waymart, which is our mental health facility. And what we also don't have on here is our two female facilities, Muncie and Cambridge Springs. And because we only have two female facilities, they can't really be all that specialized because there's only two. So all these specialized programs in the male facilities all have to be put together in those two facilities and house the inmates that need those. So within the facility, and we got a lot of alphabet soup here, we could go on with acronyms and stuff that would last a long time. Previous existing units, basically what that means are institutions that have been in place for some time, at least through this contract period. Special needs units, which we have at a number of facilities to deal with inmates that can't function well in general population. Mental health units, which I'll explain later when we talk about our psychology changes. General population, medical infirmary, DCC, which I've mentioned. Females also have one, it's at Muncie. Restricted housing units, which we have at every facility. Special management units, I guess one could put that as the worst of the worst. Behavioral problems go to those facilities. Capital case unit. Green is a major capital case location. In Phoenix, we are actually building another one because a number of our cases come out of the southeastern part of Pennsylvania, and we have to move these people back and forth for court issues a lot. So it's helpful that we have one in that area of the state. Forensic Treatment Center is at Waymart. Therapeutic communities are at most facilities, which are basically inmates for drug and alcohol issues that live in a cell block among themselves. And our Special Observation Unit, which is also a mental health unit. On the other side, with the new units, a few of these units are there for mental health purposes, and I'm going to be talking to you that in a little bit, so I'm going to go over those. I'm going to bypass those right now, which was the secure residential treatment unit, the special assessment unit, and I will talk about 3 other units that we have added. The first is the Security Threat Group Management Unit. This was the first for Pennsylvania. We always had some gang issues in Pennsylvania. Looked at these, we created a unit within our Office of Special Investigations, and we also decided that in looking at the extraordinary occurrence reports that there were a number of issues out there, gangs and certain people within the gangs that were committing acts of violence out in the institutions. So we developed this unit at Green. We didn't build new construction and all that. We took an existing unit, a restricted housing unit, and we decided in a short period of time to go round up a group of these troublemakers around our facilities and move them to the unit at Green. Since that time, we've opened a unit at Forest as well. These people, like anything, when they go in, you just don't lock them away and think that's just going to house them by segregation alone. So we have a 5-phase program to basically go through these and see what the issues are and what can be done through programming as well to see if they could go back into a general population setting. The next area is the Veterans Service Unit, and those units, we've been talking to the Veterans Affairs and other types of organizations for vets, and basically had come to a conclusion that they would like to assist in certain issues with veteran inmates as well, and the VA also provides financial support for inmates getting out into specialized homes when they get out of jail. So we've created units at Dallas, Pittsburgh, and Camp Hill where pretty much we take an existing housing unit and we just put veterans on that unit. And they discuss the issues related to them, the treatments geared towards those individuals as well. And the hope is through that, through community resources and assistance, by moving those out, that they will be less of a risk to society than when they're released. It's also by taking them and putting them in such a unit that we believe also increases the safety within the institution, because they've got other people that they can talk to who have similar problems like PTSD or other kind of issues that might be driving their issues. The last is the transitional housing units. This is also something new. They have come about to better our reentry services to the inmates, to complete our mission, reduce recidivism, by taking inmates, putting them in a geographic area where they would be going, develop community contacts, give them certain skills like resume writing and other type of things, so when they get out of jail, an inmate who gets out obviously is going to have a tough time reintegrating, because a lot of people don't want to hire ex-offenders, that type of thing. But when they don't get hired, then they come back to jail again in many cases, and we recycle them and go through the same process. So we've developed these type of units. They've been very recent, only within a year or so. There's no data to support how effective they are in doing that ultimate mission that we have for them.
These are the 14 community correctional facilities?
No, these are within jails themselves.
They are within jails, okay.
Yes. The Laurel Highlands was the first one that we started. Okay, the next I want to talk about is the accreditation by the American Correctional Association. The department has been having its institutions accredited for a number of years now, back since I started in the early 1980s. Accreditation is important because you bring a panel of experts to come in, look at your facility, see how you're operating against the 61 mandatory standards and 469 non-mandatory standards for institutions. And you need to pass 100% of all mandatory standards and 90% of non-mandatory standards to achieve that accreditation. In 2006, we became fully accredited in the department. Recently, one other thing I wanted to mention, that because we were talking about training, with the Auditor General testifying last Wednesday. On the ACA website, in the benefits it states for accreditation, the number one benefit that it states is that agencies do it for improved staff training and development. So just wanted to point that out. The department's changing its approach to accreditation. We still believe it's effective, but we are reorganized. We are going back and making every institution get accredited, not re-accredited. After you're accredited, you go through a review every 3 years to get re-accredited. We've decided that with changes that we're making in mental health and some of the other things around the department, that it's important enough for us to get a full set of eyes on what we're doing, that these standards, are met, national standards, so to have those auditors come back again. It will also save us money in the future because the reaccreditation takes place every 3 years. Well, our institutions were not all developed at the same time, so they were accredited at different times. So you have two institutions like Huntington and Smithfield on the same grounds that aren't accredited, so auditors, and they have to fly in from these other places and pay all those bills, etc. So now, if they get accredited in the same year, we can reduce costs in that matter as well. So we're seeking that revised accreditation right now, and we're in the process of developing that plan and having institutions to begin that process. This is a listing of the staff. This is of filled employees by bargaining unit and management. Of the 15,384, as you can see, Pscoa by far is the largest group of employees in the agency, followed by management. I will say each of these groups, which all work inside the fences of the facilities that we have, from AFSCME, who would be clerical staff, to licensed practical nurses, to other staff, to PSSU counselors, CIVIA and FOSEP education and activity staff, registered nursing, and doctors in the other 3 units that we have there. They all work within the confines, and they all have their issues that we treat as well separately, and bring all of these people together in the department to fulfill the mission and work together to get the job done. Staff training. We are proud of our training, and frankly, happy that the Auditor General found what he found in terms of it being out there that he found it. Not maybe that it happened because it got to that point, but if it did get to that point, that we become made aware of that and make changes. Because we deal with a lot of other states, and our programs are recognized around the country. They're recognized by the Department of Labor for apprenticeships programs, by the VA. And so now these training programs, this isn't just the academy. The training academy, people go for basic training down there, but they also go for certain follow-up programs. But a lot of training is accomplished back at the institutions, in the institution training programs for meeting the number of hours of training, per year. So I'd also like to point out that in training, we are making a number of changes. A couple will be on some slides to come. We recently hired a new director of the academy within the last 12 months. His name's Michael Dooley, and he comes from the National Institute of Corrections, where he served more than 20 years in that capacity. Basically, it's 40 hours of training that's required pre-service for non-contact, 80 for contact, 120 for H-1 contract. We also have another 160, which is 4-week basic training. I think that question was asked to the union, and I'm not sure if that's the answer that was said. However, we have changed it 3 times in the last year or two to better that number, but that's currently the number we have and that we're satisfied with. And then the OGT for the corrections officers, trainees, is 45 weeks, which is broken out in the next slide by working with multiple posts, such as 2 officers in the unit, single posts where there's only one, restricted posts such as the restricted housing unit and other posts like that. In-service training, as I mentioned, is pretty much done at the institution level. And one of the things that we're doing is we're adding training on web-based training. I mean, it's following the trends of the country in doing this. There's certain things that, on-site training is going to be necessary to do, so we wouldn't want to get out of doing that. But we certainly, see going from a bricks and mortars to basically computerized training and getting the same message out across the department as well.
Can you give us an idea of what percentage of the training is computer-based as opposed to typical bricks and mortar? I'm talking about the usual sort of recertification each year. Once you have an established CO.
For the contact people, most of that is done at the institution. It's going to vary, so it's really hard for me to give you an answer by what an institution does, but a lot of that is done with instructor training.
Okay.
For management, some of us who don't have quite that contact stuff, and things like firing weapons and stuff or whatever, that obviously has to be done, with instructors there.
So there's a lot that goes on at the local level.
Yes, very, very much so. Okay, what I'd like to now take you into is basically the correctional institution. Since inmates are confined to facilities and they can't go out and get all these services like you and I do around town to different places to get services done, those services have to be brought inside to the facility in order to get that. So I'm going to start with food service. And we have approximately 700 employees and 7,500 inmates that are employed in the food service department in the DOC. We make all the meals for the inmates and the staff that eat in the facilities as well. And in fiscal year 2012, which is the last completed year, we had over 58 million meals served. This is a major operation within the institution. We also, I'm talking about staff and inmates some training in food safety and sanitation. We also offer some special programs in culinary arts that move into the vocational training portion as well. Medical departments, other than when an inmate would need care beyond what could be given in the institution, all services are provided on site. DOC has nurses, dentists, and support staff, and our clinical staff is provided by an outside vendor. Over the years, we've consolidated certain medical services at some institutions to reduce costs, to reduce outside hospital trips by providing services inside the units, and we still push, wherever we can to bring a specialist inside when we can get a certain number of inmates that, could get those services done rather than taking them out. A couple of the things that we have consolidated was the oncology services, which is at Pittsburgh, formerly at Graterford. The program moved within the last year. Hemophiliac program, which is a very expensive. Somebody could bleed out and cost $700,000 in one case to getting blood. If you deal with certain hospitals and blood banks, they can get a special rate on those things, and we do that at Pittsburgh. So that helps us reduce costs and why we send those cases there. Dialysis, we provide at Laurel Highlands, and hepatitis C treatment at Dallas, Forest, and Muncie. Mental health program. Each institution has psychology staff and contract psychiatry staff at each of its sites. The Office of Psychology that's mentioned on the slide is a central office entity that was created at a bureau level just last year to provide oversight to all the institutions. And frankly, there's a reason for that. The main reason is that inmates with mental health issues, as we've seen over time, has grown significantly. It's kind of insidious, maybe not if you're dealing with them day to day, and certain individuals are pretty obvious for certain cases. But in terms of overall numbers, we've seen that the number of cases has increased, and how we reacted to some of these cases, which was long-term segregation for people, because some of these people with mental health issues are also just bad people. I mean, that some of these, they have assaulted and maybe even killed another inmate, or injured staff, or other type of things, and they just can't be with others. But over time, their performance, in the units, had deteriorated, and at least one inmate had written to the U.S. Department of Justice, who investigated their case, and they did a big investigation of the department, not just Pennsylvania Department of Corrections. They're doing this across the country. A number of states have been hit by this changing mental health services, and what they believe is just locking people away without providing services in that. So we've restructured our program. We've also restructured our contract with the vendor, MHM Services, to provide pretty much the first performance-based mental health service contract in any state correctional system. That we look at their numbers of treatment and their success rates and things, and that affects the amount of money that they can achieve as bonuses or loss of money, for not providing for the year. More on mental health. As we went through, and the Department of Justice came and they went to a number of our facilities, looked at our policies, and they looked out at 6 of our institutions that staff went to see what was out there. You know, our people were taking notes as well, not just to say that the DOJ, and here's how we can fight the DOJ, but once again, as a saying, if you're a good system, you want to learn if you have any deficiencies, and you want to learn, you know, what you can do to make things better in your state. And through a lot of experts coming to testify and meeting the staff, we decided that we would make some changes for the safety and security of all in the institutions. And the first thing we did was we decided to develop some additional mental health units. Some of these units were on the other page of units that I said I'd bypass until we get to now. The first is the secure residential treatment units. And that unit, and we had a unit called a secure special needs unit before, but we altered its mission somewhat, and we've changed its name to Secure Residential Treatment Unit, and these units are diversionary programs for inmates who have identified serious mental illness and behavioral problems. And these units enable inmates to have out-of-cell time, which is a reduction in their acting out behavior. And this is something that basically all the experts that have come through and testified, you know, if somebody has a severe mental illness and they're locked away for a certain period of time without any interaction, that their mental health is going to further decompensate. So we've looked at that issue and understand, again, that some of these people are problem inmates, that you just can't go and say, well, let them out, you know, of their cell, but they would need to have, in these units, that they have out-of-cell activities. So out-of-cell activities that an inmate with severe mental illness who's in these units, who's in a 5-phase program where they can earn privileges as they go through, but they would need to be required to get the 20 hours a week of out-of-cell activities if they meet that SMI definition, which is severe mental illness. We have 7 of these units around our system at Camp Hill, Frackville, Graterford, Muncie, Pittsburgh, Retreat, and Rockview. And we use a multidisciplinary treatment team, which includes all the staff in the unit, from the treatment staff to the corrections officers to everyone involved. They all have a role to play, you know, in dealing, you know, in this unit to make things work well in these units. And the units that I've been going through, there's, you know, seem to be working very well, and all the staff, you know, like being in those units, and accept the challenge of working in those units. Special needs units, we've had special needs units for some time. Basically, those units house inmates with physical disabilities and other vulnerable populations for non-mental health reasons. So a special needs unit is going to be a place where inmates that can't function well within the general population are put in these units, but they're not going to be those that with mental health, severe mental health issues. Those inmates will be put in the next unit that's listed there, which is a residential treatment unit, which is pretty much the same thing. They can't function well in general population, but these inmates have mental health issues. So as I talk to you, certain institutions have SNUs, some have RTUs, and we'll explain that as I go along. Mental health unit at Pittsburgh, we decided to add one more mental health unit to the 3 that we had in our system. We found it best to have a mental health unit in each of the 3 regions of the state, and we didn't have one in Western Pennsylvania. And the last of the items there is the expansion of the intermediate care unit at Waymart. Waymart has a large portion of its inmates with mental illness. In the ICU, we added 43 beds to the original 50 that was there, which provides intensive mental health treatments to the inmates at that site. And I'm mentioning this because, and spending a lot of time on it, because severe mental illness is a key issue in the institutions, and it affects safety and whatever. And we need to be doing things to make sure that we deal with those individuals who could get off medications and act out and be problematic. So to recognize that and to make changes to affect that. The next part of this slide is 14 institutions have been identified as D-roster SCIs. First question is, what's the D-roster? All inmates are assessed for mental health ability, the state of their mental health, and D-roster is basically severe mental illness. C-roster also gets you on the mental health roster, but D-roster is considered severe mental illness. There are there's between 4,000 and 5,000 inmates that have been classified with SMI in the institutions, so that's why 14 institutions have been determined to handle that group. And in those 14 then, they would have secure residential treatment units, the residential treatment units, and for a lot of these SMI inmates, they could be in general population. They may be on meds, you need to, watch that those, meds are being taken, etc. But, if they're acting out, then they would be at a facility that could best provide the resources to handle them. We've chosen to put the inmates, and we haven't completed it yet. We have started the process. Inmates from Dallas have been moved to retreat. Inmates from Forest with SMI are being moved to Albion. Inmates from Frackville with SMI are being moved to Montenoy. Within the next, probably to close out the year, we'll have made all the moves out of the facilities to move them into these D-roster SCIs. And one of the reasons for that is staffing costs, developing a culture within those facilities of a treatment culture for these places. Anyone that would go, for example, to Waymart would see, how they deal with mental illness because they've been a mental health facility for some time, compared to some of our other facilities who haven't had that many mental health inmates, or they've been scattered around, and you just see the episodes from that instead of having them as a group and seeing those effects. So the expectations of these sites is basically to provide programming, to make sure they're maintained on their meds, to work, they are inmates, a lot of them will be getting out of jail. More than 90% of all inmates in our prisons get out of jail. And a lot of these people fall in that same category. So we have a responsibility to deal and provide treatment. Because you wouldn't want us in the department to take an inmate who maxes out of the facility because they aren't behaving and they've got no treatment, and okay, your time's up, we don't have the ability to hold you anymore under the law, we're just going to put you out on the street, and whatever happens, happens. Unfortunately, that does happen sometimes with people who aren't going to pay any attention, there's going to be some of those. But we certainly try to minimize those cases and eliminate all if possible, but provide the treatment that we can to at least that inmate has the ability to make those changes. Last thing I want to mention on this slide is training. The crisis intervention training basically is a week-long training that developed out of a police model for dealing with individuals in crisis for mental health. We are training our staff now that work in mental health units for this 40 hours of specialized training to to learn how to cope with these inmates, recognize signs, talk people down from situations that they're in. I mean, there are some negotiators and stuff we have psychology staff. They may not be always right there, and you're confronted and you have to make decisions. So by bringing this team together, we've conducted, and more than 300 staff have been trained. This is all fairly recent, within approximately the last year that we've begun this program. The last program, mental health first aid training, is going to be required for every employee in the Department of Corrections. Whether they're at central office, don't visit the institutions, to those people that, you know, will be working in one of these specialized units and be working with them every day. This training that we'll be doing and needs to be completed by the end of March by all employees, March of 2015, which is an 8-hour training. Helps you to recognize the signs of mental illness. I went through part of the training, so I can say, like, one of the things that was done there is you put an earbud in your ear and you play off, and like 5 people are talking at one time, or one starts screaming in your ear, and then you try to see how effective you are at doing things. It's to understand what someone who might be hearing voices in that are doing. That's what this training's about, to help recognize those signs as well, and to help recognize, because even though we say all the SMIs are going to go to these 14 institutions, some people will decompensate over time and not be severe mental illness, but that will kind of grow into that through problems over time. So people have to recognize that. And if there are issues that are episodic, how to treat, how to deal, who to contact, you know, when you find these out. This is a huge investment for us, and we believe it's necessary. As mentioned before, we believe our training, you know, needs to be excellent. We have to provide for the things that are going to be experienced in the facilities, and mental health is definitely one of those. So it has begun. Trainings, you know, are taking place at the facilities. Probably as we speak, there's some going on in facilities, and they'll be, you know, done, like I said, in less than a year from now. Okay, well, that one took a while. Education. We have more than 11,500 inmates that attend academic or vocational classes a day. We issue, or the state issues, more than 1,250 GEDs to inmates, as they did in 2013, which was at a higher percentage rate than the aggregate of citizens in Pennsylvania and in the country. Basically, inmates pass at a 75% rate that go in, so, you know, we believe that we have an effective program, and we keep running more inmates every year. So if some inmates don't make it, you know, they're, you know, pushed back, because we in the department feel it's important to get education. It's hard to function outside, you know, without a GED and getting a job. And if you come in to the Department of Corrections and you don't have a GED or a high school diploma, you have to enroll in programming before you can work at corrections work activities in there. It's a requirement. Another good reason for that is when you look at recidivism rates, the people who've gone through and have got academic and vocational education show between 5 and 8 percentage points. There's been 3 or 4 studies out there. One was the state of Washington to show on recidivism about the impact on education programs and recidivism. The vocational programs that we have, a lot of those are tied to jobs, and our barber program, automotive program, are pretty successful in inmates getting employed, you know, when they leave our facilities. Treatment programs, during the last full fiscal year, there were about 13,557. Guess that's more than an about, looks pretty specific. Inmates that were enrolled in AOD treatment, as we have more than 33,000 that have an AOD problem that we can establish, you know, through looking at their records and through giving them testing in the DCC process as they come through. Our programs are developed using the principles of effective correctional intervention by targeting the specific risks and needs of an offender through effective treatment, recidivism, reduced both community and institutional safety by getting inmates involved in treatment programs. And we have more than 18,000 inmates that are taking overall treatment programs, which include those in battering, criminal thinking, reentry, etc. Next program within our facilities is correctional industries, which most of the staff, of course, in here are H-1 bargaining unit staff. It's one of our trucks, big house products, which we call. There's twofold reason for correctional industries. Well, actually, there's really one, which is to provide inmate employment and to do things. Their second one is to remain self-sufficient. But if you didn't need the first one, you wouldn't need the second one. But you know, in order to provide that valuable experience, sometimes what we do in there and making garments and stuff is not going to translate well to the outside in the United States because not many are made there anymore. But it still gives the institution skills such as reporting to work, learning to work from, you know, a supervisor and working as a team with the others to get the job done. They can make bonuses in certain programs there, so if they don't work as a team, you know, they wouldn't accomplish that. These are some of the products, over 2,500 products and services in there. We don't show it on there, but we do make license plates as well as one seems to, you know, put with corrections programs. We actually do for the state, but we make more things than that. They're made at Fayette along with other metal products and things that we have. And we make a lot of garments, including the officers' uniforms, inmate clothing, furniture, many other things. Optical services at Cambridge Springs, it's a small program, but I wanted to point it out because almost all inmates that get released from that program find employment. So that is one that actually has a tie direct to employment, but it is a small workforce that we have in that program. Laundry services, some of the laundry operations are under correctional industries. Built some large laundries at Somerset Retreat, Frackville, and recently at Benner Township, which had opened within the last few months, the laundry. And right now, you know, some institutions that are doing their own laundry will have their laundry, you know, moved to Benner Township to this automated equipment, which is pretty fascinating. What can be done in laundry compared to what we might think does. Besides doing DOC institutions, they do laundry for other state agencies, for nonprofit nursing homes, state universities, etc. And over 22 million pounds for fiscal year 12-13, and that number is going to go up substantially. And this year, as I said, we opened a new unit at Benner Township, which is our most efficient facility yet. We have 3 facilities around the state. The picture of the inmate in the lower picture. Well, actually, they both are. They both come from one of our fulfillment centers, as we call them. These are big warehouses that orders are placed from the institutions, and individual orders from inmates that go to these fulfilling centers. They're all operated with security and whatever, and packages are checked going in and out. They come into the institutions and they're handed out by commissary staff, which are H-1 staff, in the facilities to the inmates. The product's marked up 4.75% to help fund recreation programs for the inmates because we don't use taxpayer dollars to purchase things like basketballs and movies and that type of thing. Maintenance and trade departments is a very large operation in our facilities. We hire a lot of good staff that work, that have a lot of knowledge, that do a lot of projects in-house, that have, you know, a lot of expertise to, they can construct things. We don't use a whole lot of contractors. When we go to a contractor, such as a capital project, there's a lot of things, but small buildings, repairs, the plumbers and electricians, et cetera, that we've got. And they're called tradesmen instructors because they actually show the inmates, because the inmates are part of the workforce out there, how to do that work, so that they get hands-on training in the facilities like that. Same way as our utility plants and wastewater operations that come under our maintenance department as well. We have a few contracted places where the heat is shipped into us, but most of it's generated on grounds. You know, through our staff managing that. They're huge operations. These facilities are big, and just the, you know, grown over 39,000 tons of coal, 1 billion cubic feet of natural gas, and 3.3 million gallons of fuel oil in 1 year. And that was 12-13. I'm sure it was a lot more this year with the cold winter that we had. And water usage, again, when you think of 51,000 inmates and the functions that we do in here, you know, 105 million gallons of water, you know, may not be outrageous, but when I look at the bill, sometimes it's saying, wow, we use a lot of water. But they're big operations. Bureau of Community Corrections. We have over 4,500 inmates, or inmates who are SIP inmates and parolees out in community corrections. We have 15 centers that have 1,500 of those inmates, but we also contract with 44 centers for the over 3,000 other, mostly parolees that are in community corrections. In 2012, and I'll talk a little bit more as we get on to a couple slides, but the Justice Reinvestment Initiative that Governor Corbett and the legislature and others had worked on, you know, came to pass, was enacted into law, and had some major changes on community corrections programs. First of all, the offender that's in community corrections is not somebody who's just coming out of jail and remaining as an inmate in corrections. That's no longer the case. That changed back this last June 30th, which was the last date inmates were allowed to be in community corrections programs. If you're an SIP or state intermediate punishment inmate who gets a special sentence from a judge, which is basically for an AOD problem, and they must attend various AOD programming throughout that time in intensive programming in order to complete their sentence, they can be in that program. Everybody else is either a parolee. You're either a parole violator, who is taken off the street for technical violations. It's technical violators that are in here, that are sent, in some cases sent back to the institutions first and then sent back out, after an evaluation to the centers, or you're paroled to a center. The Board of Probation and Parole looks for inmates at the time who are up for parole to see if they have a home plan that they can be put back in their community. In a lot of cases, they fail on a couple issues, and rather than keep them in jail for a longer period of time because they believe that they meet the requirements to be paroled, except for that one or two pieces of their home plan, that they will place them in the Community Corrections Center, and during that time, they will complete those last pieces to the home plan and then be released as soon as that occurs. We have restructured our program significantly because of this, because of the type of offender that's going to be in this program. Also, for those 3,000 inmates that are out to contractors, once again, we had a learning experience a couple years ago. We had a study come and evaluate our program, and they said it wasn't all that effective. You put someone in a halfway house so they can transition back to jail, but they pretty much had the same recidivism rate as someone who didn't go through that program. So they try to, factor out all the differences of that. And we found out there really wasn't a whole lot to factor out. The guy was an expert in his field, and he was right. So that was part of what we used to change the structuring of community corrections in the Justice Reinvestment Initiative and the laws that were passed to do that. So now these people, the units are being held mostly for parole violators. But as I mentioned with mental health previously, we're using incentives now and performance indicators in our contracts. And we're doing the same thing with community corrections. We're going to evaluate your recidivism and how effective you are. And that's going to affect the amount of money that you're going to be paid. So if you're not making it, it'll affect a little bit more. You might not be around anymore to keep doing business with us if we find out you're not doing what needs to be done. If you're doing about what needs to be done, you'll stay at the same. If you're finding ways to be proactive and reduce recidivism, which might be by getting certain programming out to them, certain mentorings, whatever needs to be done out there, then that can be rewarding for you by receiving a little bit more reimbursement. It's not a significant amount in the contracts, but what drives these vendors isn't necessarily the amount that you're paid extra, it's that you were paid extra, and that's a feather in your cap, and you use it to go out and sell your business to everybody else around to say how successful you were. Okay, moving on to inmate population growth. Since 2006, you can see that our numbers in the Department of Corrections, that our growth has been declining significantly. This pretty much began with this administration working between the Parole Board and the Department of Corrections, working on the docket of inmates that, who gets on there, how quickly they can move out. Moving through the paperwork part of the process, because that sometimes was holding up inmates from getting out. So that gave us the first successes. And then the passage of the legislation of the Justice Reinvestment Initiative, which I will talk about that shortly. And I think the next slide shows even better than this. Might be hard to read that. That's basically, is a slide we used for the appropriations hearings this year and shows the growth of the inmate population under the various governors. Under the Corbett administration, the average growth per year has been 64 inmates. And the last time, in 2011, when we were having these similar discussions, you know, growth was a big issue as the population was moving up, as you could see, because it was almost in the last 4 governors, we had over 1,000 more inmates being added every year. We've had 64. And actually, sometimes you don't want to speak too soon on these things, but I looked at this is basically a number from December 31st, because we did it by actual years. That last month, our population of DOC dropped 300. So if you look at that drop of 300, that 64 goes away. Those are the official numbers put out by the staff who counts, and we only put them out at the end of the month when everything can be verified, and those were the latest numbers that are out. So those numbers are basically where we're at. So the population, you could pretty much call it, you know, within the last couple of years, has leveled off. There may be certain institutions that have seen some gains and whatever, we can talk about that, but as the overall number, you know, that's where we're at. So let me, you know, as I lead this slide on, just talk a little bit more about the Justice Reinvestment Initiative. In 2011, Governor Corbett gathered a team of experts from around the criminal justice system to develop recommendations for how we can simultaneously curb our prison growth and costs while also enhancing public safety for the citizens of Pennsylvania. The administration partnered with the Council of State Governments as a consultant to guide this process. This became known as the Justice Reinvestment Initiative, also known as JRI. JRI was formally launched in January 2012, with the team meeting several times in early 2012 and delivering recommendations to the governor by May 2012. As a result of these recommendations, the legislature enacted 2 landmark pieces of correctional reform legislation, Act 122 of 2012 and Act 196 of 2012. There were many parts of these 2 pieces of legislation that target prison population. Projections showed an expected major impact on population reduction as a result. Indeed, by the end of 2012, our population had been reduced by 454 inmates, which was only the 3rd time in 4 decades that our population had actually gone down rather than up in a given year, and it was the largest population drop in 4 years. I will say most of that occurred because of the changes with parole during that time frame, because the JRI was just enacted. The major component of the JRI legislation, which is leading to short-term reductions in population, is the complete restructuring of our community corrections system to house more technical parole violators. In years past, as many as 3,500 or more TPVs were returned to state prison each year with an average length of stay of 12 to 14 months. The new legislation now presumptively sends TPVs to community corrections centers or county jails rather than to an SCI, and also caps the length of stay in custody for a first parole violation at 6 months. As said before, 12, 14 months that you might be incarcerated. And this is expected to continue to have a large impact on the population, especially the SCI population. The longer-term population impacts are expected to come from the various initiatives passed in Act 196. These initiatives basically involve taking some of our budget savings as our population goes down in the short term And the first year there wasn't much, the population did not drop that much, so there wasn't a whole lot of savings. But taking those savings and reinvesting into initiatives that will guarantee longer term and sustained reductions, such as front-end criminal justice changing, like good police, law enforcement activities, and effective county probation. I mean, this is a whole cyclical type of thing. You take money and you keep funding the changes, and if there's changes on the front end, that you don't keep locking up as many people that you do. Which leads us to the projections. So I've showed you where we are today. These are projections. Sometimes projections don't turn out always the way they should. But there is a group of correctional, or it's actually a multi-agency team of forecasting, which has people from criminal justice agencies like the Board of Probation and Parole, Corrections, the Governor's Office, PCCD, the Sentencing Commission, and others that use the best data available to project out what the changes, look like into the future. I can't always project, and like I said, using the best data, whether other factors are going to change in the upcoming, such as other laws being passed that would, put more people in jail than what were on the books at the time, or if sentencing practices or the number of parole violators sent back to jail, whether those things wind up changing in the future. They're basically using trend analysis to come forward. But the numbers show, that we'd be looking to drop population from anywhere from 700 to close to 1,000 in those years ahead. Right now it's been a little bit slower than what we've had for the first year. This last month hopefully is an indicator, because we haven't seen those changes as much up to this point, but we keep working with parole and making changes, so we're thinking that has had some impact.
Secretary, do those changes, are they for both, just for SCIs, or is that the community centers as well?
It's the entire DOC population.
Entire DOC, okay.
Which is DOC inmate population, so a lot of the centers are parolees. So we don't count the parolees in our population. Okay, the next area and the last, I'm still within the city of the city. We kind of jumped around a little bit, but safety and security is the last piece of this, and as that first sentence there says about acting as one team committed to enhancing public safety. We feel good about the staff that we have. We have excellent staff. We provide training, and they operate the facilities, as mentioned here, in an efficient, safe, and secure manner. And that's what you have to have in a prison. Because despite, things will happen from time to time, they will always. If you don't have these things in place, it would even be a worse place. And we believe the Pennsylvania Department of Corrections is very good in this field. Also, in terms of the safety and security, some of the things I mentioned earlier about the new institution development for safety purposes and increased specialized units are impacting on this as well. It might be a hard slide to read. This is the change in the H-1 Corrections Officer complement since July 1st, 2011, which is basically when this contract began to now. I wanted to include this slide because a comment was made previously that whenever we do a manpower analysis, that we tend to reduce the staffing at the prisons, and one can look at this and see that that is not the case. what we do in a manpower analysis is we do have staff that come out to an institution and they'll walk the posts, they'll meet with the staff at the institutions and take a look at it. If things haven't changed a whole lot at their facilities, that manpower analysis and numbers probably don't change a whole lot. As you see, most of them haven't changed a lot. Now, when there's things like additional units and things added, it is going to. For instance, if you look at Forest went up by 39 staff. Most of that was related to the STG-MU being placed at that facility as we opened up that additional unit. Because that was a unit, I said we typically don't build, we use the units that we have, but that one had been under construction and that had to be staffed. At Rockview, 26 increase, well that was for the changeover to the secure residential treatment unit there. You know, that was added and it was a major unit there, so they needed new staff. But only 6 out of all the facilities had lost staff. It's an increased number of staff, but it also could be seen as a decreased number of staff if you look at the fact that why we segregated out at the bottom of the page is that we wound up closing 2 facilities and we opened a new facility. And there was a drop in staffing related to that. That's an efficiency issue. There were some beds lost, so you may have to add beds at Pine Grove back as a fair number because we had to open that at the same time. But that's why we talked when we did the prototypical, why we showed that slides and stuff. When we build newer facilities, you're building in the staffing, etc. You're taking out the nooks and crannies and corners and all those different things that are difficult for corrections officers to see, and you make those physical site improvements as you go along. So that's pretty much what I want to show in this slide. We continue to make improvements, technology, training, safety, physical enhancements. Some of these things have been around a while now, but they've also been things that are, you know, we've been, you know, moving ahead. The metal detectors, right there on that one there, that's one of our walk-through detectors, one of our handheld detectors. Our biometrics identity verification systems, what I want to say about that is we put a lot of money into changing those out in the last 2 years, and they are very effective now. They basically are what staff fingerprints in and out of the institutions with to make sure that people going in and out are those who are allowed to go in and out. Our ion scan equipment here, which is our electronic drug detection equipment, are used, it can be used on staff and others, but it's mostly for visitors that we do, and you'll see why as I go on to another slide later. Mailrooms, one of the things we added lately was this thing right here, which is a drug detection light pad, because inmates are always finding out new ideas, how to get things into the jails, and so they were getting Suboxone on basically the back of envelopes. We whipped them in, and you know they were including that in, and so this helps to fight that. So you know, we keep adding things to counteract you know what the inmates are doing, plus what changes are being made in the corrections environment. Our escape deterrents, many of these have been in place, but we do keep updating them. Two fences at the locations with lots of rolls of razor ribbon. This here is our IDVS system that I talked to you about before about the fingerprint. That's what that looks like. And we keep updating our, what we call our perimeter intrusion detection systems. A number of facilities are getting new systems now, and about 8 others have capital projects approved that are going to start, within the next year to update. So we keep updating technology. Things get old and need to be replaced. Staff personal safety, radios, alarm systems, body armor. I think what was shown about the incident at Cole Township and the people with the equipment that you saw raiding the cell to get that inmate out that was non-compliant is an excellent example of that type of a situation and the equipment that they have and the fact that someone is going in there trying to negotiate the situation first, and if necessary we got to use our tools in order to go in and make things happen. Also on the less lethal use of force, you also saw them, use the OC or pepper spray as well, getting in. That's why the inmate had the towel over his head to try and, keep from getting that as well in that video that you saw there. So these are available throughout, from the non-lethal sim rounds and ammunition to the types of OC and the stun type of equipment that's mentioned, the EIDs that we have. Picture from our Canine Academy, which might be the best in the country, put in a word for the great staff that work in that unit. It is not nationally recognized. They've been going out training staff in California and some other states, and staff will be coming here as well to learn from our programs. Our Canine is part of our effort to keep institutions drug-free, never keep it 100% drug-free, no matter what you do. But we've instituted a lot of efforts to, and now basically since the 1990s when Secretary Horn was here and he decided he'd raid Graterford because he was tired of the drugs being in prisons, and so a whole task force went down there. And since that, that we've been, keeping that motto up, looking to reduce drugs, and this number, which I'll show on a couple more slides, then is where we're at today. Also things to help security-wise, security threat group validation, which is in the Office of Special Investigations, field intelligence units that, a closer relationship with those in the field security offices. Drug fines. It's interesting to note, if you look at this slide, and you might not be able to read it, most of the room, but that number in black is basically the number of drug fines which are non-prescription drugs on the inmates. The white line is the number of prescription drugs that the inmates have that they shouldn't have, and the yellow are fines on visitors. So as you see, that for thinking of smuggling drugs in, it's not the majority of the drugs and the drug usage, the drug fines that we find in the institution. Call this zero tolerance. That's what we've used now since the 1990s. But we've kept it up because this is something easy you could fall back on. By not being vigilant, it does cost money to have the canine teams and the ion scan machines and all the other stuff that we do to be successful. Now this 0.5% drug is from the positive rate of the random drug test. So it could be slightly misleading that if there's targeted inmates, that may have notice that that number is not included in this number. In conclusion, we do strive in the Pennsylvania DOC to be the most proactive DOC in the country. In some cases, others, are looking for that mantle. So we're looking for what other people, we learn from one another. But if we see things, like I said, with this training audit, with this DOC or DOJ audit of our mental health, we react quickly. We're moving ahead. We're getting ahead of the game, not behind the game. If we have fallen behind in some area, we certainly make the effort to do that, especially in an ever-changing correctional world that we're in. So we are a leader in that area. And the last thing I want to say is, for the more than 15,000 staff that work in the department, we wouldn't be where we were today if it wasn't for them. You could put all the equipment out there, you could write policies, you could do all that, but if you don't have the people to actually do that and make it work, it's not going to work well. So our success is tied to the success of our staff. We think we got great success, so that has to be a great staff. Thank you.
Anything further?
Nothing further.
Any questions?
We do have a few questions. We take 5 minutes?
Sure. Okay, do you have questions?
Just a very few, thank you. Deputy Secretary, thank you for your testimony. I have just a couple of questions. Just going back to the beginning, it sounds like you've been with the department a long time. You said you started in 1982?
That is correct.
So you're about, what, 32nd year now with Department of Corrections?
Yes.
Okay, so over that time, and you didn't come in as a corrections officer, right? You said you came in as an analyst, so you've been sort of in a management role since the very beginning.
That's correct.
Okay. And so you've been in a position over those 32 years to see a lot of changes in policy and a lot of changes in the prison system. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. I think you described a lot of it. I mean, I think there was a slide sort of near the beginning where you were looking at the inmate population and, of course, the DOC's budget. And from when you started through where we are now, there's been quite a dramatic increase, correct?
That is correct.
So we've gone from, what was the number of inmates when you started? Was it somewhere around 10,000, did you say?
Between 10 and 11.
Okay, and now we're over 50,000.
51.
Okay. You noted some of the changes that have been made in the Department of Corrections, one of which was the types of facilities that were being built, right?
That is correct.
So I think the way that you characterized it was that after Camp Hill, I hope I have this right, that's when the initiative to begin building the prototypicals began. Do I have that right?
Yes. Okay.
And the prototypicals were developed principally to provide for a safer environment for the officers. Was that your testimony?
That was part of it, yes.
Okay. And so not only has the number of inmates over this, your past career, not only has the number of inmates increased dramatically, but there have been other changes in the prison system as well. And one of the things that you spent a lot of time talking about was mental health. Would it be fair to say that the diagnosis and understanding of mental health in the institutions has changed since you began?
Yes, yes.
And I think you said it was I hope I have this right, that the number of inmates with mental health issues has increased, right?
Yes, definitely.
Okay. So, and that's a big deal, right? You said a lot of those people are in jail for very serious crimes. They're in jail for murder or assaults or violent crimes.
Yes.
And it's critical in terms of officer safety and inmate safety to be able to understand who it is that has these mental health issues, right? and it's directly impacted the nature of the corrections officer's job, in the sense that you said you're now focusing training, not just to take people that you believe or it's already been established that they have mental health issues and you put them in a special unit or in a special wing of the facility, but you've put it on the corrections officers. Put it on might be the wrong word, but you get what I'm driving at. The corrections officers are now being trained to see and understand who may have a mental health issue.
Yes, yes, that's what, at least to a degree, how to deal with it in the mental health first aid. If you actually work in a unit, then you even get more detailed training.
All right, and it's difficult to deal with those types of inmates, fair to say?
Not necessarily. If the person's acting out, yes.
All right, and fair to say that their condition makes them more likely to act out?
It would be more kind of an episodic thing where it could be perhaps unexpected, more than constant.
I thought you said...
Unless there's various types of mental illness and things within that. So you'll have people who basically on meds, no matter how badly they are being controlled. People who don't take their meds could have things, people who hear voices, people have schizophrenia, people have all kinds of diagnoses may act differently.
Right, and there's a challenge there, right, for the officers to be able to identify who it is that might be suffering from mental illness so that they can get the proper treatment for those folks. Correct?
Yes.
All right. And when it's episodic, it can be very bad. Is that fair?
Yes.
Okay. And it's just so to go back for a minute to the prototypicals. Were you here when Sergeant Delbaugh testified as part of the association's case?
Yes, I was.
And he had talked about SCI Cole Township. You remember that, right?
Yes.
Now, SCI Cole Township is a prototypical. Am I right about that?
Yes, it is.
Okay. And during the course of your testimony, you talked about the changing nature of the prison population, that under the Corbett administration, there's been an average increase of 64 inmates per year, right?
Yes.
And that's different than according to the slide, some of the other increases under the other governors, where it was much more dramatic, right?
Yes.
Okay. Now, one of the things that I didn't see when you were giving your presentation was information about the ratios of inmates to corrections officers. You didn't have anything on that. I didn't miss it, did I?
No.
Okay. So you didn't prepare anything to challenge the association's numbers in terms of the number of inmates to the number of COs? Right.
Objection to the extent that he's cross-examining on something that he didn't do. I will concede that we didn't prepare anything because there's no issue and dispute concerning the ratio of inmates to correction officers.
He said it's not in dispute.
Okay. So, and now when that testimony was given by Sergeant Delbaugh, he, and it was part of the presentation by Attorney Cook as well, we were showing that a number of the institutions are working over capacity in terms of the number of inmates. Do you agree with that?
They're working, in our capacity definition, they are more than 100%.
More than 100%. Okay, thank you. Now, in terms of just understanding the effect of the population by looking at Cole Township, there was a photograph, I believe, as part of that presentation that showed what Sergeant Delbaugh identified as the warehouse. Do you remember that? He called it the warehouse, I believe.
I know what, yeah, he did call it the warehouse.
Right.
That's not what it is.
Well, that's the vernacular, of course, but
that's not the official one.
yeah, I wouldn't think that it's an official term, and I'm not trying to pin that on you. But you remember the slide that I'm talking about? It looked like a bunch of bunk beds.
It's the large dorm that was created out of the old Correctional Industries furniture factory.
Okay, all right. Yeah, it was. Yeah, okay. So that particular portion of the facility was a furniture factory.
Yes.
Okay. Now, a prototypical is a new facility, correct? It's newer.
newer and compared to what some of our old ones, our H-1s, yeah, they'd be newer. Although from the people who work there, they don't think they're so new anymore.
Probably not.
20-some years old.
Now, I've been to like SCI Benner, not that long ago. I've never been to SCI Cole Township. Would they be laid out primarily the same?
Yeah, roughly.
And be a heck of a lot different than like Pittsburgh, right?
Oh, correct.
Okay. So, and I'm not trying to put you to get on your bad side here. I'm going to just call it the warehouse one more time. But in terms of that large dorm, which Delbaugh called the warehouse, would it be accurate to say that that's not part of the prototypical design?
That's right.
Okay. It's purely a result of inmate overcrowding. Fair?
It was developed at a time that we were in need of bed expansion in the department.
Okay. There were no regular cells or regular pods to put those inmates in, so they were put in the furniture factory.
Well, they were put in that area after it was reconfigured, and it just wasn't put in the furniture factory. They took those rooms and redone it, put some walling up, and did some other things into that. And yes, they converted it into use for housing.
In terms of prison design, though, it's atypical. Fair?
Not necessarily. It's a dorm setting. It's a pretty large dorm setting for us, but we do have dormitory space in other facilities.
Is most of the inmate housing dorm setting like that, or pod setting?
Most of it is pod setting.
Thank you. Just give me 1 minute. Now, in your presentation, I think it was, you'd given some testimony about the recent legislation that pushes more inmates towards the community correction centers. Is that a fair characterization?
It pushes more offenders to community corrections,
Sorry.
not inmates.
Fair enough. So, and when was that piece of legislation passed?
2012.
Okay. Now, we located some comments by Secretary Wetzel, that's your boss, right?
Yes.
To the House Appropriations Committee on February 12 of this year. And his comments to the committee were that you say you want change, but you keep passing the same bills. Since adopting the prison reform legislation aimed at reducing the prison population, the House has passed no fewer than 23 bills that will likely increase it, either through the creation of new criminal offenses or lengthening the sentences for existing crimes. Are you familiar with that testimony?
I was there, yes.
Okay. So that's a very real concern. Fair?
It's always a concern, yeah.
And that would contradict the slide indicating that the projection for the inmates is going to go down.
It would not,
It would not.
no. Here's why.
Seems like it would. Go ahead.
Okay. When projections are made, the secretary was talking about bills that were introduced. They weren't approved. They didn't get through all the committees. We don't know if they're going to make it to actuality. When the forecasting committee uses data available, it doesn't take assumptions of what could happen in the future and take things that haven't happened yet. It can only use those bills, et cetera. Which is why, though, I mean, you make a good point in that the projections could be off. The projections may be accurate based on the information that they use in availability, but if laws change and they were not factored in, it could affect the outcome in the numbers.
Right. I think that was my question. Thank you, Deputy Secretary. Appreciate your testimony.
Okay.
Anything further, Brian, of this witness?
Nothing further, thank you.
Anything from the panel?
I just have a couple of questions.
Okay.
Secretary, I'm a little bit confused. I see on some of the charts, like on page 30 of the presentation, inmate population growth. You show that it's kind of like leveled off, but I want to make sure my math is right. I see that you say that the population increased by 317, but then decreased by 454, but then it increased by 328. To me, that looks like it increased by about 200 between 2011 and the latest available figures.
Well, that's correct. That would be to 64. That would be up to the
And
corporate administration.
during that same period of time, if we look at your slide about H-1 correction officer complement changes, with the closing of the two facilities, the bringing online Benner and increasing the, I guess, the mental health units that you spoke of, we see an overall decrease in H-1 staff complement by about 57 during the same period of time.
If you factor in the closings in that were made for efficiency purposes,
Okay.
that would be correct.
All right, and those efficiency changes really didn't result in any less overcrowding in the prison population overall, did it? I'm talking about overcapacity, more than 100% capacity.
It was more of a trade-off.
A trade-off.
And with the beds added at Pine Grove, probably was about a neutral.
But at the end of the day, there were 57 less H-1 officers to back each other up.
No. Well, it depends how you look at that. I'm showing all these institutions which those officers couldn't be backing up at a place that they didn't work, from places going from two closed facilities, going to a prototypical, which we stated has better staffing. So yes, there may not be 57 people at Benner to back them up that came for or were sent to other places in the system, but they were not needed according to the staffing survey.
Even in those facilities where they're operating at 115%, 117% capacity?
Some of those institutions did get some additional staff out of that closing. That's factored in here, like Pine Grove, Laurel Highlands.
Okay, but some of the others that were still overstaffed by, overpopulated and operating at about 117%, they didn't get any additional staff, did they?
They didn't get any additional permanent staff. Any changes that we made related to the closing. Let me just explain here, because this chart might be a little confusing in that these are complement changes, which is a little bit different than the filled, if you go back to the bargaining unit chart that I gave, so those were filled positions. These are complement changes. These are salaried complement positions. When we closed facilities and we gave some institutions some additional positions, they were on wage positions, and a lot of those were basically, so there'd be some additional jobs for these staff to go to. And their wage, meaning that they were temporary, so I don't count them as a long-term kind of a thing. That's why we used the salary complement, because wage, you get into replacements for people that are off on disability and some of that type of thing. So our salaried complement, we do not increase the other facilities, other than if they were getting the inmates like Pine Grove.
All right, thank you for clearing that up for me, but I have a couple other questions. You say 51,000 inmates. Does that count the number of, I'll call them parolees or quasi-inmates, I don't know how you want to characterize them, that are in the CCCs?
It does not.
It does not. So, but your $1.9 billion budget also includes
It does.
those people. And how many people were in the CCCs?
There were about 4,600.
In addition to the 51,000 inmates that we've been talking about.
Those that are SIP would still be considered inmates, so there's about 500 that's in that classification.
So we're really talking about 55,000 all told that you're responsible for? That DOC is responsible for?
That we're funding.
That you're funding, okay. Can I have anything else? Oh, one other thing. And Mr. Stoltenberg mentioned this, and I think you would agree that dealing with serious mental illness with inmates is challenging. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
And the department has made a concerted effort to identify those with SMI and try and deal with them specifically, and that's why you've opened up all these new centers and the new units. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
And you recognize that it's kind of unique and challenging in dealing with these people, and you provide about at least 40 hours of training each year to the CO to deal with these people. Is that correct? Did I understand your testimony?
Yes.
And how many hours a year do you devote to training the CO on how to deal with the mental stresses for the CO in dealing with these mentally challenged people?
I'll object. I mean, he certainly can answer, but none of this is an issue that's in dispute. So I'm not sure what its relevance is, although
I believe that it is an issue.
more than welcome.
But
No. Wages and benefits are in dispute.
He was struggling with the answer. If you know the answer, you can answer.
We don't have specific DOC programs on staff to train on mental health per se. I mean, we do have programs available, such as SEEP and other things for mental health purposes. So the Commonwealth has programs. It doesn't have a specific DOC training plan for that.
thank
And
you.
I will represent for the panel that we will have a presentation on the outlets that are available.
Okay, we'll wait for that presentation. Do you have any questions?
No, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, you're welcome.
Secretary. Brian, where to?
Well, since we took a break already, why don't we just jump to the next presentation?
That'll be fine.
Marcia Hepner, the Chief Forensic Executive for Torrance State Hospital, and Edmund McCutcheon, the Chief Executive Officer for the Norristown State Hospital. We spent a lot of time throughout the balance of the presentations talking about jails. And what we didn't spend a lot of time discussing are the facilities that DPW is responsible for. And while it may not be as overwhelming in terms of money, it's equally important, and it is something that we believe deserves an equal amount of attention. So with that, I will turn it over to our panel.
Okay, thank you.
Good afternoon. It's our pleasure to be here this afternoon speaking with you regarding a special program which also has H-1 bargaining unit members. But before we begin, we'd like to tell you a little bit about ourselves, and I'll ask my colleague, Ms. Marcy Hepner, to begin.
Good afternoon, panel experts, and both sides of the table. My name is Marcy Hepner, and I'm here to tell you just a little bit about myself before we begin. I'm an alumni of Penn State University, and I began my career almost 30 years ago working in community mental health in Cambria County, a small western Pennsylvania county. I worked there for about 14 years doing everything from intake, evaluations and assessments, trying to determine needs of people that were from all walks of life. I worked with preschoolers in a variety of situations and at-risk youth coming from very broken families. From there I worked as an intensive case manager and became eventually the adult mental health coordinator for that county. I also worked as part of the Community Hospital Integration Program Project Coordinator, which helped with transitioning people from state hospitals back into the community and developing new programs to try to meet the needs of all of our members of the community. Oftentimes also dealing with multiple systems within the community, including the legal system, the correction system, and multiple systems that were involved with families and youth and people as they go through the various walk of life. I then became a member of the state hospital team at Torrance State Hospital and came aboard with them as part of the risk management and quality assurance team. As part of that position, I was responsible for helping the hospital maintain compliance with all of the regulatory oversight that was in place at the time with the hospital. We were Joint Commission accredited and also met the standards for participation in CMS, which is the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services. Since that time, I also became the Chief Performance Improvement Executive for the state hospital, and again was responsible for maintaining the accreditation of the hospital and working with all the departments within to help them to maintain compliance so that we were ready for accreditation. In 2008, the decision was made for Mayview State Hospital to close. And as a part of that closure, there needed to be some attention given to the forensic unit that functioned within that state hospital. At no time did we talk about closing that facility. We changed our address, basically. We moved that entire facility in late November, mid-November of 2008. And during that time, I had the opportunity to become the Chief Forensic Executive and have been with that program since 2008 as the Chief Forensic Executive, and learning and growing with the program and moving it forward in all of our performance improvement efforts and trying to maintain the safety and security of the facility and providing the absolute best product for our patients and for the safety of the staff within the facility. We'll tell you much more about that program as we move on, but I'll pass it back to Edna McCutcheon to tell you a little bit more about herself.
Thank you, Marcy. Again, it is our distinct pleasure to be here, and I would like to just tell you a little bit about myself. Don't add up the years because there's a lot of them, and it'll give you the age here.
We realize you started at age 12.
Thank you so much, sir. Yes, I wasn't sure the word had gotten out on that, so thank you. I received a bachelor's degree from Indiana University of Pennsylvania with a double major in psychology and sociology and a minor in anthropology. I went on to receive a master's degree in social work from West Virginia University, that would be Go Mountaineers, and began my career in social work as an instructor with West Virginia University. I decided that I wanted to actually develop my skills in social work administration, so I was the administrator of an aging program in Preston County, West Virginia, while my husband was completing his career in education after getting out of the Air Force. We returned to Pennsylvania, which is our home state, and I began my career with the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania at Torrance State Hospital as a social worker 1. The career that I've had has afforded me many opportunities of successive roles and responsibility. I was a social work supervisor, the social work department director. I became the chief rehab executive at Torrance State Hospital, and in 2004 was appointed the chief executive officer, where I served until 2012. And then accepted a dual responsibility for both Torrance State Hospital and Norristown State Hospital due to a short notice of the retirement of the chief executive at Norristown. I was responsible for both the state hospitals for approximately a year, and then accepted the permanent transfer to Norristown State Hospital, where I currently serve as the chief executive of the hospital. And now I'd like to proceed with our presentation, unless there are any questions for Marcy and I about our background.
Let's proceed.
Thank you, sir. H-1 bargaining unit employees serve in the Department of Public Welfare in the classification of forensic security employees. This is distinctly an opportunity for H-1 bargaining unit members to serve in a therapeutic environment by working in the state mental hospital system of the Department of Public Welfare. The FSEs, as I'll refer to them, abbreviating the forensic security employees, serve in 2 regional forensic units at Torrance State Hospital, where Marcy is the chief forensic executive, and at Norristown State Hospital. Both, again, are through the Office of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Services in the Department of Public Welfare. We thought it might be helpful for you to see a slide. As you can see, Westmoreland County is the home county for Torrance, the Regional Forensic Psychiatric Center, and Montgomery County for the Norristown State Hospital Regional Forensic Center. I'd also like you to note that although it may look disparate, there are 48 counties that are served by the designation for the Torrance RFPC and 19 for Norristown. However, that's based on county and per capita population. As a member of the DPW, Office of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Services, the Regional Forensic Unit does serve under the OMSUS mission statement, and I won't read it for you, but you can certainly see that it highlights on providing services for mental health and substance abuse that are reflective of the needs of the Commonwealth citizens.
So we move on to tell you a little bit about what actually is a regional forensic psychiatric unit. We gave you a copy of the Mental Health Procedures Act for your reference as we go forward, because the things that qualify us to run this type of program fall directly in line with the law that's defined in the Mental Health Procedures Act. We want to ensure that the intent of the Mental Health Procedures Act is fulfilled, and when that act was first put into place, we needed to develop a partnership between the judicial system, the Department of Corrections, and Department of Public Welfare, and that was where the inception of the Regional Forensic Psychiatric Centers came to be, so that we could further meet the criteria of the act. We want to make sure that we're providing treatment in the best possible setting. So the requirements specifically are to establish rights and procedures for all involuntary treatment of mentally ill persons. And it requires us in every case that the least restrictions consistent with adequate treatment shall be employed. They also go further to define adequate treatment as a course of treatment designed and administered to alleviate a person's pain and distress and to maximize the probability of his recovery from mental illness. So this is, although we heard much about the progression that the Department of Corrections has made over the past several years and moving much more in a treatment model, it doesn't apply to every inmate that is served within the Department of Corrections. Within the Department of Public Welfare, in our regional forensic psychiatric centers, every patient is there to receive treatment. Our provision of services are under the auspices of Medicare, and we are required to participate in on-site reviews to maintain that level of participation. And so we saw earlier last week some pictures that may have been a little misleading. This is actually the exterior of Norristown State Hospital's Forensic Center, and you'll see that we do have a secured fence. This is the Torrance facility. Both facilities have very specific secure external perimeters. We want to make sure that we are constantly following our obligations to provide a safe environment, both internally and externally. Some of the numbers that may be interesting to you. Our facility capacity at Norristown is 135 patients, and as of April 17th, 132 of those beds were in use, and there was a total FSC complement of 167. Torrance, on the other hand, has a total FSC complement of 127, and we were at 93 out of 100 of our beds filled. So who's served at the forensic centers? This is specifically defined in the Mental Health Procedures Act, and there are several different types of commitments that serve from the judicial systems. Primarily, we treat people that are pre-sentence and pre-trial. Most often, they are not competent, and courts would like us to proceed with trying to establish restoration to competency. Perhaps they are asking us just for a determination of whether or not the person is competent. Oftentimes, they are not sure what to do with a particular individual that may remain very symptomatic, and they're asking us for aid in sentencing because they do not feel that the jail may be the best opportunity for that person in their effort to resolve the legal issues. In all cases, people are in need of treatment and meet the criteria for commitment or involuntary treatment. At times, we have people that are actually sentenced guilty but mentally ill, or may fall into the criteria of not guilty by reason of insanity. None of our patients come from, very, very few and very rarely will a patient come from a state correctional institute. Our patients come primarily from county jails, and they return back to that level of detention. We find that the county judicial system with local psychiatric evaluation involvement determines that the need for treatment outweighs the benefit of proceeding with the immediate legal situation.
We thought it would be helpful to describe some of the similarities that we find between the Regional Forensic Center and the civil programs, which are also located on the grounds of Norristown and Torrance State Hospital. One of the similarities are that every unit must have registered nurses on the unit 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. There are also assigned psychiatrists, psychologists, medical staff, social workers, therapeutic activity staff on the units assigned in the Regional Forensic Unit for the patients being served there, as well as in the civil sections of the hospital. Additionally, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, there is a physician on site to respond to the medical or psychiatric needs of the patients in the forensic unit, much like in the civil section. Our chart that we provide also shares some of the other similarities. Each is committed under the Mental Health Procedures Act, the patients in civil as well as the patients in the Regional Forensic Unit. Some individuals in the civil section of the hospital have criminal charges pending, and all of the patients in the forensic unit have criminal charges pending or have been sentenced. It's important to note, at least in the civil section of Norristown State Hospital, about half of the individuals in the civil section as patients also have criminal charges, much rising to the same level of severity as found for patients in the forensic unit. Finally, the paraprofessional care staff in the civil section is the psychiatric aide, and in the forensic unit are H-1 bargaining unit covered forensic security employee. We just thought that it would be helpful. We've seen pictures of the Department of Corrections, various facilities. Sometimes a picture is worth 1,000 words. So we're providing some of the comparison pictures. On the left, you have a picture of a civil unit, and on the right, the forensic unit. It's important here to note that the patient living areas in both are very similar, and there are no cells in the forensic unit. Next, these are just some highlight pictures of the various therapeutic treatment areas in the forensic unit. There are various programming areas which support the recovery of the patients being served by the Regional Forensic Unit. You can see that the upper left-hand quadrant is a sleeping area, and there are multiple individuals that share a room, and there are, again, no cells, etc. We have other recreational areas, and you're also looking at a picture of a day room living area. Again, many types of and therapeutic environments in the forensic unit to support the recovery of the individuals with their mental illnesses, including access to chapel, gymnasium, and exercise equipment.
So the hiring process for the Department of Public Welfare for both forensic security employees and psychiatric aides, or PAs, they're both hired as civil service employees from the classification of aide trainee. There's no distinguishing between the position types, it's all the same list. Our aides don't become psychiatric aides until they complete 6 months of training. Our FSCs complete 1 full year of training. One note that's not on this is our OJT program has also been approved by the Veterans Administration as an OJT program, so we've met that criteria as well. We do note also that about 30% of our FSCs had previously held position of psychiatric aides in the past.
In highlighting some of the other similarities and beginning to talk about some of the differences, this chart depicts statewide data of patient-to-staff assaults with injury, and it's across all of the state hospitals for the line which is depicting civil, and then, of course, the 2 forensic units in the line that is depicting forensic patient-to-staff assaults. And you will note that there's not a significant difference. The civil is 0.68 average rate over the last 12 months per 1,000, and the forensics is slightly lower, although statistically probably not significant, 0.65. But we're presenting this slide because we're happy to show that the forensic patient-to-staff assault with injury continues to decrease, while the patient-to-staff assault in the civil section is somewhat leveling off.
So some of the priorities that we have and some of the comparisons when we look at the FSEs and the aid training are really emphasizing that we provide therapeutic care. Our FSEs are required to provide physical nursing care for our patients, and they are required to know psychiatric terminology, and all identifying the differences between the mental illnesses and knowing what may be symptomology versus just behavior, and looking at different kinds of modalities for treatment and ways to interact and intervene with people in a therapeutic way. Always within the least restrictive environment and providing that nursing care. So both jobs really, the aid trainee or the psychiatric aid and the FSEs provide ongoing physical nursing care. They act as, they assist patients in achieving their goals and their individual treatment. All of our program is recovery focused and recovery based. Our staff are required to document the progress or the setbacks that our patients may be demonstrating. They serve as patient advocates at all times. We also require all of our staff to be trained in crisis prevention and intervention techniques, and sometimes that comes in a variety of forms. We have a statewide vendor for crisis management, but we also make sure that our staff are well-versed in other verbal de-escalation techniques and ongoing updates about how to best interact with somebody. That could happen via a treatment team, via shift-to-shift handoff, via a variety of different types of ongoing interaction and communication to make sure that we maintain our safety. Our FSCs are very good at maintaining and monitoring the safety and security of the environment on an ongoing basis.
Our forensic security employees provide a significant amount of patient care. For example, they assist patients with their activities of daily living. At times, depending on the length of stay that someone has, they have no longer maintained, or maybe they never had the ability to take care of their own personal needs. The forensic security employees provide that assistance to the individuals based on their individual patient care need. The FSCs apply therapeutic interventions whenever they are working with individuals. They engage patients in therapeutic treatment groups. Each group that the patient is assigned to, the forensic security employees accompany them and engage them in therapeutic interactions, both with the therapist as well as on the day units whenever it's the FSCs, primarily with the individuals they serve. The FSCs are very important in providing continuity of care by sharing information between the nursing staff, between other FSCs whenever they're coming on duty. And most importantly, it is the FSCs that encourage the patient to become involved in the therapeutic milieu in which they are receiving their services in the regional forensic unit. All patients, as we have said before, present with some sort of mental illness or symptoms of mental illness. And through their training, the FSCs are trained in the forensic units on mental health diagnoses. And so therefore, they are prepared to work with individuals presenting with psychiatric disorders. At the end of the day, therapeutic interventions is the primary focus of the FSC working within the regional forensic unit.
So again, reinforcing that our FSCs are different from corrections officers. Our forensic security employees are hired from an aid trainee civil service list, They must demonstrate competency as an aide trainee. All of our training is provided on-site at the state hospital. We have them responsible entirely for patient direct care, and they work very different schedules than corrections officers and fall within the line of authority under the nursing department.
FSCs work within a hospital setting, which is different from the correctional officers. We heard about at capacity or over capacity in the prison system. The regional forensic psychiatric centers are never over capacity due to our requirements for certifications and regulatory guidelines. FSCs work in smaller facilities, with smaller patient capacities. The one-to-one nursing care provided by the FSC to support the individual in crisis as ordered by the physician is also a key element and demonstration of the therapeutic skills that the FSC brings to their job every day.
Our FSCs are employed by the Department of Public Welfare. They are not part of the Department of Corrections. They work at the regional forensic psychiatric centers in a therapeutic hospital environment. So there's some comparisons. We're hospitals, we're really not prisons. We work with patients, not prisoners or inmates, and our mission is treatment and recovery focused. We often are working very hard to try to restore somebody to competency or providing active treatment so that that person can return to a baseline. Our FSCs participate in treatment teams. Our freedom of movement within the facility is not as restricted as it would be in a correctional setting. We don't have individual cells or times when patients are locked in and isolated from each other. The line of authority is through nursing, not security.
We've already spoken about some of the regulations through the Office of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Services under the authority of the Department of Public Welfare, the Mental Health Procedures Act. We are fully accredited and certified through the CMS, Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, and the forensic unit as part of the hospital, both at Torrance and Norristown, have been certified and regulated through the most recent CMS on-site surveys. We also must comply with the Older Adult Protective Services Act and Act 102. All of these are regulations and laws that apply to the Regional Forensic Unit because it is part of a larger hospital system. It's through the hospital system that the forensic security employees provide the services on a day-to-day basis within the Regional Forensic Center. We wanted to share with you as our final information some very positive outcomes that have occurred through the Regional Forensic Center. In trying to have a less waiting list, because there's a significant waiting list to be admitted to the forensic units, our services are well sought after by the counties that we serve. For individuals that were being referred only for competency assessment, the Office of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Services began a new program whereby in-jail competency assessments are done by contracted psychiatrists, thereby freeing up additional forensic beds for individuals who not only need assessment, but also ongoing treatment and restoration so that people can return to the courts. This has been very successful. In a 6-month period, 51 in-jail assessments were completed. As a hospital-based program, the Regional Forensic Unit has been able to discharge some individuals directly back to the community because of the treatment and services provided. They were able to resolve their charges without having to return to the jail system. We had 12 individuals transferred to the civil section of the state hospital within the last year, and 25 were actually discharged to community living. As a system, the Regional Forensic Unit admitted 352 individuals in the last year and actually discharged 351. To support individuals through the RFPC, there's a community planning process that occurs, community support planning, whereby the entire treatment team comes together and plans for that individual's successful return to community living. In the end, the RFPC is recovery focused because we know that individuals with serious and mental illness can and do recover, and the Regional Forensic Unit, as a significant part of 2 state hospitals in the state hospital system, play an important part in restoring individuals to the highest level possible, providing therapeutic services, and returning them to either face their charges or begin a much more beneficial life as our fellow human beings in the community. Thank you.
Thank you. Any
questions?
Yes.
Your testimony was presented in a team fashion, so I'll just yield to you when I ask a question. Whichever one of you feel more comfortable answering the question, just go ahead and do so. Can we agree that that's a good way to proceed?
That'd be fine.
Okay. And I don't have a lot of questions, just more clarification questions. What I wanted to, I guess, make clear to the panel here today is the position of FSE. The position of FSE is one you're familiar that's included within the H-1 bargaining unit. And one of the, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with this, I'm sure you are with this term, the term care, custody, and control. Are you familiar with that?
Yes.
Okay. And is that a term that applies to any other, do any other employees that work at Norristown or Torrance have care, custody, and control responsibilities other than the FSC employees?
Yes, actually, the terminology may not be the same, but the staff who works in the civil section of the hospital share the same responsibility for providing care, providing custody, as well as control of individuals whenever they are not able to control their own, for their own well-being.
Okay. And how many of you talk about the civil side and you talk about the aides that work on the civil side, they're not part of the H-1 bargaining unit?
Correct.
Okay. And you talked about the numbers in slide number 9. You talked about the number of patients that you have there. And I think you used the term, or the figure for, at least for Norristown, it was you're at a patient population of 132?
Yes.
And by law, you can't go over that 135 figure. Is that correct?
Correct.
So we talked about a general population total for all of, well, we called it DOC, but DOC is at 108 capacity. Were you here during that presentation?
I'll object to the extent that he has questions about the Department of Corrections. These lovely ladies work for the Department of Public Welfare.
I don't know, Todd, that they could answer your question. I don't know that they have the...
Well, and I understand that, Arbitrator, but I guess maybe if I was allowed to ask the question, they would have an opportunity to respond to it. But I'll move on.
No, that's okay. Go ahead. Are you going to move on?
Yeah, I'll move on. You're not, as a matter of law, allowed to go over your capacity, correct?
We have a designated capacity per program.
Okay. And that leads me to my next area. You talked about the patients. The majority of the patients or all of the patients come from county facilities?
The majority.
Okay.
Virtually all of them, but there are a few exceptions.
So you do get inmates that are transferred from state correctional institutions that come to Norristown and Torrance, or is that incorrect?
It would be extremely rare. I have not had that experience.
Okay.
There's one qualifier that I will elaborate for the panel and for yourself. There is an agreement between the Department of Corrections and the Department of Public Welfare that a limited number of beds are available to assist with CI Muncie for a few women that we could partner with and share. Muncie can make referrals to us.
And then they return to
And they
SCI.
come back.
Okay.
But that's pretty rare.
Well, when you say they come from county facilities,
Yes.
some of the inmates or some of the patients, as you call them, are serving state sentences in your facilities, though, is that correct?
They've never been sentenced to state
Okay.
time.
They would have been either through an adjudicated process, if they were, the limited number that are there, may have been found guilty but mentally ill, or not guilty due to insanity, or under 304G2, which is part of the Mental Health Procedures Act. Those are all commitments under the Procedures Act.
Well, how long, for example, what's the length of time that an individual is, and I won't use the word sentence, but is required or mandated by the courts to stay with you? What is the range?
The type, depends on the type of commitment. If it's an evaluation for competency, it's up to 60 days per order. If it's for treatment, it can be from 90 to 180 days, depending on the type of commitment that it is.
And there are a handful of people.
If there's a 304G2, that's a 1-year commitment.
Right.
Okay, so up to 1 year, or are there people that stay longer than 1 year?
There are people that stay longer, and it would again be back to the judicial system for that renewal and review.
Now, in keeping with slide number 9, you have the patient totals, and then we have the FSE complement. Obviously, we'll take Norristown, for example. When we see 167 FSCs, not all those people work all the time.
Correct.
And I've heard a ratio of, if we have 132 patients, 135 total allowed, I've heard a figure of about 32 FSCs working at most at one time. Is that a correct figure?
I couldn't specifically answer that.
Okay. So you don't know if it could be more or less? Or?
There's an approximate ratio, but on any given day, there are specific tasks that people are assigned to do, and so it may vary depending. We may need to bring other people on.
When you say a ratio, is that a target ratio that you work towards?
Right.
Okay. And what's the target ratio, patient to FSC?
Again, it varies depending on the specific needs of the individuals at any given time. If someone needs to be on a 1-to-1, we would have a higher ratio. So it's very dependent on the acuity and needs.
Okay.
It's a hospital.
And is there an average ratio that, for example, at Norristown, over a year, is there an average ratio that you can testify to? Is it 4-to-1 ratio, patient to FSC?
I'm afraid I couldn't have that number accurate enough to testify.
Okay.
That's through the nursing oversight, and the staffing is managed by a nurse manager on any given day, any given shift.
Okay, but what we do know is that all 167 FSCs are not working all at once. You
We
can
do
agree,
know
at least
that.
agree
We
to
work
that
3
figure.
shifts a day,
Okay.
7 days a week, yes.
And holidays and vacation time and the like.
Indeed.
Okay. Now, I want to now talk a little bit about slide 18. It's the slide that you presented regarding the total amount of patient to staff assaults with injury statewide.
Yes, yes.
Okay. I said slide 18, maybe I have the wrong.
No, that's all right.
Okay.
Somehow there's a little bit of a slide order, but we're going with it. We know what you're talking about.
So we can agree that this slide is assaults with injury. It covers assaults with injuries only, correct?
Correct. It's patient to staff assault with injury.
And that does not include, well, if there's some type of problem with a patient, does an incident report get generated?
Yes.
Okay. And have you looked at how many incident reports are filed for FSEs versus AIDS?
I couldn't testify to that. We certainly compare, and the data is broken out that way. I just don't have that in front of me.
I actually do review that information every month. There's a statewide risk management report that's generated. We have specific reporting requirements defined for defined types of incidents. And so we are constantly comparing the forensic indicators with the civil indicators. This was one that we felt was particularly relevant to this topic at hand. That's why we chose to include it within our presentation.
Okay. What would generate an incident report?
There's clearly a defined listing of definitions.
Okay, and what would some
Many there are.
What would some of them examples of those?
There could be self-injurious behavior by a patient. There could be an adverse drug reaction. We could have somebody who is demonstrating a different symptomology. There could be aggression, there could be a whole host of different things.
Family concerns, oh, there's a
There's
large
a
myriad
full
of.
bulletin that defines that.
Okay. And have you looked at whether or not the level of incident reports dealing with, and you said something about a patient being aggressive or things of that nature, how they compare for AIDS versus FSEs?
Generally, when I review those reports, I'm more concerned about the impact it's having on our day-to-day operations. So if I see a particular person's name, I review every one of those incident reports. So if I see a particular person's name coming across my desk more than once or twice in a week, I'm going back to the team to see what else we need to do to help to prevent further things from happening. We also get a monthly list of people that have extra medication above and beyond a particular percentage. We go back and we look at time of day of incidents. We look at other indicators that could be interjecting with that. We have discussions with the psychiatrist and the treating practitioners to make sure that we're addressing all of the needs of those individual patients so that we're keeping our staff safe. That's the biggest priority for me. So we also pull, in fact, just Friday afternoon, I had a lengthy discussion with the psychiatrist about 2 particular women. I had all of the data pulled for those 2 particular women that were presenting some challenges for our team, and the doctor had reviewed all of that information, took that into consideration as to what our next steps would be. Our hospital-wide performance improvement committee does look at the specific comparisons that you're asking about, and whether or not it's, you know, is the forensic side versus the civil side versus the statewide number looking higher or lower in a particular area. We do track and trend all of that as a system and also within the hospital.
Okay. And for purposes today, for whatever reason, the only figures that you felt that you wanted to present were the comparisons for assaults without injury. We don't have in here how the incidents that FSEs deal with versus AIDS, we don't have that information here, correct?
That's correct. However, we think that one of the more serious indicators are the staff injuries that result from patient assault, and therefore we included this because we found it to be insignificantly different. And anecdotally, without the rest of the data in front, there are significant episodes both in civil as much as there is forensic.
But that data is not in front of us.
That's correct.
That's all I have.
Anything further, Brian? Ms. Williams?
No, just so we can go back to that chart, I'll just say I think that we included it to show that they're doing a good job.
Okay, thank you. Any questions?
They're doing God's work. It's a very challenging job, and I thank you for it.
Thank you.
No questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you
for your
very
testimony.
much. Appreciate it. Okay, Brian?
I think since we took a break, unless you want to do another one, we'll transition right to our final presentation.
It's up to council on both sides. You ready to go?
Good.
Keep going.
As Pete takes a minute to sit down and Brian takes a minute to get the presentation up and running, we're transitioning to Pete so that we can take a step back and evaluate this bargaining unit in the totality of the Commonwealth's obligations. Just in these 2 previous presentations, I think you've seen and had an opportunity to better understand the diversity of issues that the Commonwealth faces every day and the obligations that those create on the Commonwealth's financial resources. But that doesn't stop here. It doesn't stop between the Department of Corrections and the financial needs of the Department of Public Welfare. That need and that pull flows throughout the entire Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and all of its public service obligations. And I think that what you'll have an opportunity here today and this afternoon is to see just how complicated that dynamic is between all of the governor's agencies and the entire public mission. We have Deputy Secretary Pete Hartline here with the Governor's Office of Budget, who will give you a presentation that puts the Department of Context and the Department of Public Welfare into the context of the greater Commonwealth financial needs and the fiscal restraint and the fiscal obligations that it has.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I intend to provide a summary of the financial
Your
condition.
mic's off, Pete.
I intend to provide a summary of the financial condition of the Commonwealth, provide a sense of the environment in which all decisions affecting finances are being made today. So as far as the economic outlook, the length that is taken to come out of the Great Recession is much longer than anyone anticipated. State budgets across the country, as Scott Patterson with NASBO says, it's remained slow, almost anemic at times. So this is different than any other recessions that we've come out of in recent memory. This slide just shows sort of GDP for the nation. Again, not close to where we were before the year 2000. And then here's Pennsylvania's projected annual growth and projected GDP growth. And these are assumptions on which we base our revenue estimates and anticipate our revenue and resources that we have. This slide, and I'm going to fly through some of these slides with assumptions, but Global Insight is our consultant who assists us in our economic forecasting. And those dates there, June, November, March, are points in time when Global Insight made specific assumptions related to GDP. And you can see how it changed over time, but looking at GDP, for example, the actual first quarter GDP results through March 2014 was 0.9%. So that just shows how off economic projections have been. And you can see even those numbers, consumer expenditures up 3%, U.S. wages and salaries up 2.8%, very modest growth compared to coming out of prior recessions. There are some bright spots, however. Pennsylvania's unemployment rate is now below the national average, certainly higher than we would wish, but just one of those inconsistencies, good news mixed in with the bad news. Just to let you know what those folks looking at Pennsylvania's financial situation are saying, rating agencies have said, we have a good, diverse, and stable economy. Our wealth is slightly above national average, and we have some key industry clusters that help drive our economy in a positive direction. Our overall state debt we've managed is moderate, about 4.1% of revenue. Very good. Recent improvements in governance have resulted in 3 consecutive timely budgets, allows agencies and the economy to plan and invest. However, they give us several warnings, and these were reiterated as we have a bond sale tomorrow. They reiterated these concerns. Our rapidly growing pension contributions will absorb and really sort of take most of any financial flexibility that we had. We are not structurally balanced. While we have made progress over the last couple of years, we are still not structurally balanced. We don't have any reserves in place, and I have a slide later that demonstrates this point. Debt service costs, pension costs, and other OPEB costs are going to continue to rise and squeeze out discretionary spending over the next several years. So I'm going to spend a few minutes just on pension costs and some of the other cost drivers after that. The 2 pension systems have an unfunded liability of about $50 billion. So we're about 62% funded, and we have about a $50 billion unfunded liability. And those of you who followed the debate know the history, increased pension benefits, decreased contributions, and then the economy tanking, sort of a perfect storm that put us in this position. So just looking at pension costs for the 2 systems and the employees' retirement system, general fund pays the majority of the employer share, and for PSERS, the Commonwealth pays about 55% of the employer share, and that's for school districts across the Commonwealth. Now the next slide really illustrates the challenge we have before us. So in 2008, 2009, the employer contribution was about 4% of payroll. And if you look as we project out, you know, the employer contribution is going to rise to about 31% of payroll. So significantly, you know, 600 million increase. And this is assuming that the pension systems hit their projected return rate of 7.5%, which you know, may be optimistic. I mentioned the increase in pension costs. That's what this chart shows. So if you look where we are today, you know, we're looking at pension, the employer contribution for the state, essentially doubling over just a short couple-year period as we project that out. So again, this points to the need for you know, pension reform, and again, here is just sort of the cost, the increase in our obligations projected out graphically, the same numbers I showed the slide before. So the governor and legislative leaders have been discussing pension reform. Obviously, those cost increases aren't sustainable. They will squeeze out sort of all discretionary spending, and so the governor and legislative leaders are discussing reform, which would be for new employees only, would not affect any current employees, transfer the risk from the taxpayers to a significant degree in the future, hopefully provide some near-term budget relief to ease some of that pressure year-to-year growth, and do that without increasing the long-term unfunded liability. So those are the objectives. And as many folks are aware, the Government Accounting Standards Board has sort of you know, new reporting requirements where you can't sort of keep that unfunded liability off your balance sheet anymore. You have to account for it in your annual audits. And so that $50 billion is now going to be on the books. Now will be calculated in terms of, you know, when we go out for a bond rating and such. And Moody's on their own has their own formula, but very similar, that you have to report this unfunded pension liability, and the next slide also any other healthcare liability and post-employment benefit liability as well. So no longer can states keep those long-term liabilities off their books. They have to be reported and have to be taken into consideration. So just a few comments on developing the governor's 2014-15 budget. Factors that went into it. The governor instructed all agencies come in, you know, level funded. We said that no general fund dollars will be used to backfill reduced federal funds. I think the only agency that saw a backfill of federal funds over the past several years was the Department of Corrections. Just to let you know what the impact of level funding is on state agencies, it means they have to absorb about an 8% increase in cost, salary and benefits. If we're level funding them, they're going to have to absorb those increasing costs. The governor's reiterated no new taxes, part of his proposal, and said, you know, again, pension costs continue to crowd out discretionary spending and really is the driving pressure on the state's budget. This slide is here just to show where state spending goes and have a pie chart from 2011 compared to what the governor's proposed in 14-15. You can see the bulk of spending is still in education and the health and welfare entitlements. You can see debt service has increased slightly, and you can see corrections. The slice of that pie is a little bit larger this year than it was just a few years ago. The pie looks about the same, just a few pie slices got a little larger, corrections, higher ed, and debt service, and a few got a little smaller. Here are the cost drivers. These are the real cost drivers in the state's budget. Again, the bar chart on the left is the estimate of annual revenue growth, and the bar chart on the right is the cost drivers, so medical assistance. FMAP there in the middle federal government sort of changed the calculation on the reimbursement rate for Medicaid. So it was just percent change, but results in a loss of $300 million to the Commonwealth and reimbursement from the federal government. Just another pressure. $600 million increase in pension costs, about a $50 million increase in debt service, and then about a $78 million increase in corrections cost. Overall, the Commonwealth has seen a reduction in staff complement over the last several years in an effort to rein in spending to get to balance. Just a few summary items on the general fund. This is revenue. This is data as of March, where corporation taxes were coming in very close to estimate. Sales and use tax was significantly below estimate. Personal income tax was just about right on estimate. But through March, we were about $176 million below estimate for the year. We're still going through April's returns, but preliminary estimates are April alone is about $290 million below estimate. Corporate tax is below estimate. Sales and use tax is actually right on estimate. We had some very cold months where folks didn't go out and buy anything. So now that the weather's broken, we came in about even in April. But personal income tax revenue is way below estimate for April. So we're still still going through those returns and analyzing that data, but that appears to be very consistent with other states. New York, New Jersey, Illinois, Michigan, and such all are seeing a significant reduction in their personal income tax returns. If the numbers hold, we're probably about 21% below what was anticipated in personal income tax for April. Not an encouraging sign, and certainly presents a huge challenge closing out this year and going into next year. This slide really just shows projected.
Which states did you say? You said New York, Illinois, New Jersey?
New York, New Jersey, Illinois, Michigan. I can provide that later if you'd like and give you the exact states. But the point there is Pennsylvania is not alone in that dynamic. Other states are seeing 20, 21, 22% personal income tax revenue below estimate as well. So that's the point there. This chart simply shows that we haven't had a rainy day fund since 2009, and we still don't have a rainy day fund. And the red bar really shows what kind of rainy day fund or reserve the rating agencies indicate we ought to have. If we were where we should be from a fiscal standpoint, we would have a rainy day fund, and we don't. At least 61,000 is not close to the 1.4 billion that would be recommended. Just some data on the Department of Corrections. This is similar to what Deputy Secretary Ringler showed as far as the inmate population. This is just sort of juxtaposed against cost per inmate. That would be the blue line heading upward, and that's a little deceptive there. The top line, that's an assumption and an estimate of where the inmate population is going to go, and frankly, it's hope on our part that that's where it goes, because that's where the costs are. But part of that is an assumption moving into the latter half of the current calendar year. This chart I referenced earlier just shows the growth in CI funding. The blue part of those bars were the federal stimulus funding, and you can see from 2010-11 to 11-12, the Department of Corrections was the only department where the governor chose to backfill the loss of federal funds. And you see funding has increased steadily, essentially slight increase from 11-12 to 12-13, and then about a 20 million increase or so to 13-14, and then proposed another increase for 14-15. And just a comparison of the operating appropriations, SCI versus some of the others, state police, Medicaid services, county assistance offices, et cetera. This pie chart just shows SCI budget by category. As you can see, about 80% is in personnel costs, and then other operating and fixed assets, and a few minor other areas. But again, the only point there is about 80% is in personnel costs, which is slightly greater than most other state agencies. There are a couple that are a little bit higher, but most are lower than that. This chart again was referenced earlier, but you can see the corrections complement over time over the last couple of years compared to the complement of all other state agencies. The left is the numbers related to all other state agencies, and then corrections is there on the right. We have a number of risks moving forward. One is all of our assumptions have been, all of our estimates are based on certain assumptions, and all of the economists out there made certain assumptions. Recently, the Congressional Budget Office has sort of resized the economy, so to speak, and revised the size of the economy downward by about $1.5 trillion, which means that the growth that we were expecting, CBO saying our economy they thought was this big is now this big. We may not have the capacity to grow as we all had assumed and frankly had hoped. So, our assumptions over the last number of years, ours, the collective ours, the national ours, all of us may have been off around the country. So, we have about $100 million in revenue shortfall from small games of chance. Hasn't panned out. I think we have 6 licensees at this point, where we expected a couple thousand. The governor's proposed budget did not assume a raise in 14-15. So we have some challenges ahead. Again, I mentioned escalating pension costs. Healthcare costs are going to continue to rise, and we have the Affordable Care Act requirements to address as well, and frankly, we're not sure exactly how that's going to pan out. We have $125 million in budgetary savings that we would achieve through waivers that are currently pending in Department of Health and Human Services, and we're waiting for approval of those. And then we are assuming some growth in corrections costs. Tim mentioned some of the driving forces in those, but we have about again, a $78 million increase in corrections assumed in the budget. The governor's budget does try to continue to make improvements in investing in job growth, job creation, as well as in students. This chart we saw before, but again, is just to reinforce those escalating pension costs and the pressure it places on the rest of the discretionary budget. The key entitlement program that creates a challenge for us is medical assistance, Medicaid, and this is primarily long-term care for aged and disabled. And again, the Affordable Care Act provides some new requirements for us, and we have some pending changes, benefit structure changes that we would try to seek some savings from. But again, this is going to be a challenge, and it's going to require, regardless, at a minimum, probably us to hire 600 county assistance workers in our Department of Public Welfare just to implement the Affordable Care Act. The Commonwealth is an employer, and it's going to cost us about $36 million just to implement the requirements for our own employees under the Affordable Care Act. So we do have some challenges there, both as a deliverer of services and as an employer as well. This chart really shows where our medical assistance dollars go, to which populations. So you can see older Pennsylvanians make up about 17% of the Medicaid population, disabled about 24, but between the two of them, you know, that's almost 80% of the cost. And as you can imagine, that's the growing population. And the next chart sort of shows growth projections of that over 60 population, and if that's the cost driver for our Medicaid system, that's where we're seeing growth. That's going to just create increased pressure almost at an exponential rate on our Medicaid system, and that's you know, currently half funded by the federal government, half funded by the state, and that's an entitlement program. Those are benefits individuals are entitled to, and we have really very little discretion there. Another mandated cost is debt service payments, and again, we could not do another capital project from here on out, and we would still see a graph that looks like that because of past capital budgets and debt that's already been issued. So our debt service payments will continue to rise even if we shut down our capital program and didn't invest in any of our assets or facilities from this point forward. This chart here, I think, really captures the challenge that we have before us. If you look, the green bar is revenues over time, and you can see the slope of that bar coming out of the 2001-2002 recession, not a bad trajectory. And then if you look at 2007-2008, you can see we were $26.9 billion in revenue, and mandated spending was about $11.6 billion on that you know, red bar underneath. You can see through the Great Recession how revenues dipped, and it took us about 5 years for revenues to reach the same point that they had prior to the Great Recession. But during that same time, you know, mandated costs, those I talked about, pensions, Medicaid, debt service, you know, increased from, you know, 2.3 billion to 4.2. So while revenues were fairly flat, mandated costs almost doubled, and so that has the effect of really squeezing all discretionary spending, as I mentioned before. And sort of the last year on that chart there, where you see sort of an optimistic uptick of that green line. If we were doing that chart today based on the April revenues I just told you about, it probably would be a little flatter than it was on that chart. So then this next chart really intends to show that how close we are to structural balance. Revenues in the green, spending's in the blue. You can see we're not quite there. We haven't been there. Those years where it's significantly apart was when we had federal stimulus money to fill the gap, and we've made progress to get spending closer to revenue, but we're not there yet. We still have some challenges, and you know, based on the revenue numbers that I shared a few minutes ago, you know, it's going to be a challenge for us to get there. So, you know, that was a quick summary. I know you've been here all day, and there's a lot of folks who probably want to get out of here, but so I won't take any more time with the presentation. I'd be glad to take any questions at this point.
Thank you, Pete. No questions.
Any questions?
Mr. Tartline, I'm going to ask you a couple questions. My name is Attorney Todd Egan, and I represent the Pscoa. If you don't understand a question and you want me to clarify, just ask me to do so. If I don't hear that, I'll just assume that you understand my question, okay? Now, turning back to slide 5, you can agree with me that in terms of Pennsylvania, the GDP, at least with your projections, into 2015, 16, 17, and beyond that, are higher than they've ever been since 1999. Is that correct?
Yeah, so initially you would think, look, the economy's been depressed for a while. It's going to start to recover. GDP is going to grow. But then, as I also said later, first quarter this year, we're looking at 2.5, 2.8% GDP growth. First quarter was 0.9. So, to be perfectly candid, I'm not sure any of the economic models hold anymore, and it is difficult to project and estimate in today's economy.
So we should, if the economic models aren't holding, should we just take this and throw it in the garbage? Or, I mean, I don't know what you're telling me here.
That's, I've had the same reaction myself on occasion. So.
Now, the bond rating that Pennsylvania holds, a AA bond rating?
Correct.
And could you just explain, that's on the higher end of the bond rating, or where does that fall?
It's probably mid to high.
Okay. And when you go to, if you want to turn to slide 16 next. You talk about the pension reform that Governor Corbett's administration is proposing. And the proposal is in the current budget, or is it not?
The current budget assumes we will reform our pension system. It assumes about $170 million in savings to the Commonwealth on an annual basis, primarily through the imposition of the collars, constraining the employer contribution to 2.25% growth, and then the school districts would benefit as well. They'd see about $130 million savings. So that is it's the collar, the imposition of the collar that's assumed in the governor's budget, resulting in about $170 million in annual savings.
In the reform that's on the table, would that include the new employees being moved out of the defined benefit plan into a defined contribution plan?
Not entirely. The concepts that it appears that legislative and gubernatorial leaders are coalescing around is sort of a side-by-side hybrid, which would maintain a defined benefit plan for even new employees up to a certain income level, and then above that would be a defined contribution plan. That seems to be, it's sort of the Tobash bill that's out there.
Okay. You said that at least in your presentation, it says you're trying to achieve these goals without kicking the can down the road. You use that expression. Now, the State Treasurer McCord has reviewed the pension proposals for Governor Corbett, and he's given the opinion that, in his opinion, that the proposals are kicking the can down the road, at least in regard to the pension plan for the school districts. Have you reviewed State Treasurer McCord's comments in that regard?
But before Pete has an opportunity to answer, and I'd like him to answer because he's perfectly capable of doing it, but to the extent that he's being asked to compare Treasurer Rob McCord, who's running for governor, against Governor Corbett, and being asked to compare whether or not he agrees or disagrees with Mr. McCord serves no purpose in this proceeding. But Pete's perfectly capable of answering any questions, so he can answer if he wants.
Well, and I would disagree. This is a state elected official whose job is to make sure the Commonwealth funds are invested properly. And for the Commonwealth to say that the state treasurer's opinion in regard to the state pensions is not applicable to these proceedings, I think is disingenuous.
It's not at all disingenuous. You can vote for whomever you want, Todd.
And I'm not making a political
purpose
statement, and I, quite frankly...
Yes, you are.
I'm not. I'm saying that he's reviewed the proposal, and he says that...
Who cares?
Let's say this, the politics don't bother me one bit. I think he's very capable of answering the question if he can. So ask the question.
The statement refers to, not kicking the can down the road. In other words, not making any changes that increase the unfunded liability at the back end. We need cost savings at the front end, but we don't want to increase the unfunded liability at the back end. Our actuaries and the CSRS and PSRS actuaries have all studied the proposal and all agree that they don't increase the unfunded liability at the back end. I can't tell you who Treasurer McCord used as actuaries to come up with his analysis.
But you would agree that the state treasurer has disagreed with the Corbett administration's analysis that their pension proposal is not kicking the can down the road. That's a fair statement. Whether you agree with the opinion or not, they've given that opinion.
I don't know that he's given an official opinion.
Share that opinion? That's your question, is whether he knows that McCord disagrees?
We will also concede that Mr. McCord would like to tax gas companies. We'll concede his entire political agenda.
And I take offense to these comments that are being made to my questioning, because this individual comes here to speak about the budget, and when I test him about the budget, they start to make fun of the questions that I'm asking. Is that appropriate for this type of proceeding?
I think what we want to do is focus your questions on the information that he's provided in his testimony, and you've referred to other ways to go about the pension reform. Let him answer the questions. Try to focus in on what his presentation was and try to get to your specific questions. That's fair.
And that's what I'm trying to do. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Now, you talk about the return rate on the pension. You have a 7.5 assumption rate at slide 13.
Right.
And you talked about, when we talked about Treasurer McCord's opinion as to the pension proposal, you referred to what CSRS did, or PSRS did, correct? You said that their actuaries looked at it and determined that it was
Correct.
proper, or something to that effect. So let's take a look at what CSRS has a current market return at. CSRS reported a current return rate on their investments on March 12th of 2014 of 13.6%. And you're using an assumption of 7.5%.
That's the assumption that both systems use, yes.
Okay. They have an actual return right now as of 13.6. So these numbers could change, correct?
Absolutely. The greater the return rate, the less unfunded liability, yes.
And the Corbett administration has made decisions in regard to what it wants to see budgetary in its budget, correct?
Yes.
And the Corbett administration has made the determination that it's not going to tax the natural gas industry with an extract tax, correct? An extraction tax?
Correct. We did not assume a severance or extraction tax in any budget.
Okay, and that's a choice that the administration made that it had a right to make, correct?
Correct.
And there's estimates that even a 5% extraction tax would generate in year one, $1.6 billion.
I'll object to the questioning to the extent that whether he agrees with the policy agenda has nothing to do with what we're trying to accomplish. We will concede that the governor will not agree to raise taxes, that the revenues that are generated under the current fiscal policy are the revenues that will be generated under this governor. Hypotheticals of what if we had more, what if we had new taxes are totally irrelevant to this proceeding.
Part of his proceeding, I'm not sure what slide, but it did say, Todd, that, the position is in preparation of this budget, there would be no increase of taxes, so.
Correct. And that's a choice you made, that you're not going to increase taxes, correct?
Correct.
And whether it's 1.6 billion, we can assume that if there was an extraction tax, that would generate more revenue, correct?
Objection.
Well, he objected. I'll take arbitral notice that if you increase taxes, you have more revenue.
Maybe.
Okay.
Because, you know,
Let him answer the question.
we are getting considerable revenue from that industry. You know, over $300 million in corporate taxes today. There's individual income, rents and royalties, sales and use. So there is considerable revenue coming in now from that industry through our existing tax structure.
Okay. Now, the corporate administration has also made a decision on whether it should expand Medicaid or not, has it not?
Correct, and I described the approach that the administration was taking in seeking amendment to the state plan and waivers to implement a Medicaid system in Pennsylvania that fits our needs, you know, recognizing that we have a broader benefit package than most other states that simply accepted Medicaid expansion. We have some different cost drivers than a number of other states, and we have a program that's almost unsustainable in its current form, so simply expanding the current system did not make a whole lot of sense.
Okay, and I've read reports, and these are not political reports, these are generated by the Treasurer's Office of Pennsylvania that said not expanding Medicare under the Affordable Care Act, that Pennsylvania stands to lose $4.7 billion. Are you familiar with that figure?
No, but I will tell you that with the proposal that Governor Corbett put forward, we're looking at still an increased cost in the first year, but then $300 million in savings the second year by, again, the waiver, state plan amendments, and what he's proposed as far as co-pays and benefit plan amendments, changes, as opposed to our numbers show a cost increase for a straight expansion of Medicaid.
Okay. Now, one thing I do know, when I turn to slide 27, back in April of 2011, we had the very same type of proceedings between Pscoa and the Commonwealth. And I sat at a very similar table, and you sat at a very similar table. And you testified back in April of 2011 that the general fund revenue growth was, if it was going to increase, it was going to be by very little. And you actually had testified that you had projected a deficit. Do you remember that testimony?
That was before we had the spring surprise that year, I believe, yes.
Okay. So when I look at slide 27, and I look at the general fund revenue growth for 2011, or 2010, 11, 11, 12, 12, 13, I see increases in the general fund revenue growth, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So when you sat here back in April of 2011, your projections didn't pan out the way you thought they would,
That's
correct?
correct.
That's all I have.
Any redirect?
No.
Any questions?
Yeah, just one or two. Pete, how long have you been a Commonwealth employee?
11 years.
11 years, all right. In those 11 years, you've made contributions to your pension, have you not?
That's correct.
About 6.25% per year. And all the CEOs in this room, they make a contribution of 6.25% per year. Is that correct?
So,
And has there ever been a year where you have not made your 6.25% contribution?
no, sir.
Has there ever been a year where the Commonwealth has not made its contribution?
The Commonwealth has always made a contribution. I would argue that it has not always been at the ARC. That's very, very true.
Thank you.
Hence is why we got into this pension crisis that we're trying to solve now.
Thank you.
Deputy Secretary, just a quick question. Thank you very much for your testimony and for being here. I wanted to just quickly back to slide 13. Are you familiar with the historical investment returns for PSERS and SERS?
Yes, to a degree, but I don't have that in front of me, so I can't really.
But with your basic knowledge, with the 7.5% projection, I think you said that's reasonable, maybe even a little aggressive.
That's their assumed rate at this point in time.
Right. So, and with your understanding of historical, would something of a 13% return be? What would be your opinion regarding assuming such returns?
That'd be a really good year.
Okay.
And just to put that in some context, we could get 15% returns for the next 10 years and still not, fully address the unfunded liability. So.
And that's due to the big hole that was dug in 2008?
8, 10, the economic crash, yeah.
Or more so 8. It's hard
Or
to
10,
dig out of that hole.
Act 120, 2008, 2002, or whatever it was.
Okay, Brian?
Thank you. That
Thank
concludes our
very much, sir.
presentations for tonight.
Okay. Thank you. We'll see you tomorrow at 9:30.